Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 creepiest graves ever discovered. Across the U.S. of Under 7, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. My name is Jacob Runnels, and I'm from Waco, Texas. I'm not posting this for karma or attention. I'm posting it because it still follows me, and I don't know what else to do. If you've ever driven a long, empty highway at night and felt like the dark was getting heavier with every mile, you already know a sliver of what I'm talking about. 2 Halloweens ago, my little sister Mara asked me to drive her to Kansas to pack up what was left of our aunt's farmhouse outside Topeka. Aunt Deb had passed that summer. We were late on everything, probate, the realtor, the whole mess. It felt rude to do it on Halloween, but it was the only weekend I could get off, and Mara insisted. She said she wanted to say goodbye to the house before we let it go. My best friend Luis decided to come along for the ride. He's the kind of guy who turns road trips into playlists and gas station junk food Olympics. He was also the one who said, "If we're going through Kansas on Halloween, we have to check out Stull Cemetery." I didn't know the name, not really. I'd heard it in passing, one of those places that shows up in urban legend lists. He pulled up an article that might have been written by a bored undergrad. Supposedly the cemetery is on a gateway to hell. Supposedly there was a church whose roof was torn off by a storm, and rain never fell inside. Supposedly the devil himself showed up every Halloween at midnight. Dumb, right? The internet is a scrapyard of spooky paragraphs and stock photos. I told him absolutely not. We had a job to do, but you put 3 people in a truck for 8 hours with coffee and AM radio through the Flint Hills, and the miles start to feel like a dare. By the time we reached the farmhouse, the sun was going down in that quick, sudden way it does on the prairie. Like somebody stretched a gray sheet across the sky. We hauled boxes while mice rattled in the walls. We found old aprons, church bulletins, a brittle newspaper clip taped into a cookbook about a hailstorm in 1974. I called the motel to confirm our 2 rooms. Mara stood on the back steps with a sweater pulled up around her hands and watched the field go black. "Let's just go look," she said. "Drive by. If the road is closed, we go back to the motel." "That's it. Drive by," Luis repeated, grinning. "We can keep the engine running." It was my truck and my gas, but it was also my family and my guilty conscience. I told myself I was humoring them. I told myself it was just a place. The town of Stull is hardly a town. At night it's a shape made of 2 or 3 lights and a road that passes through without stopping. The wind there has a personality. It doesn't just push, it pries. It gets its fingers under your collar and lifts. We made a slow turn by a low fence and what might have been an old stone sign. A cluster of trees leaned toward the hill like eavesdroppers. Past them, pale shapes in the moonlight made a crooked, jaw-like line across the crest. "Is that it?" Mara asked. "Yep," Luis said, too cheerful. He was filming on his phone but tried to hide it. "This is it." There were no trespassing signs posted everywhere. One of them was new, the white still bright against the dark. The others were older, slouched into the dirt like tired shoulders. I put the truck in park and left the headlights off. We sat there with the engine ticking. The tall grass along the ditch hissed and bowed as the wind tunneled through. "Okay," I said. We looked. "Time to go." Mara leaned forward and pressed her forehead to the glass. "Do you see that?" "On the hill. I saw a black shape. It could have been a tree stump or a headstone. Behind it, something low and rectangular like a foundation." The stories said the church was gone, but Luis swore there were portions of wall still standing. He said the stones were so old it was like they became the dirt. You didn't see them until you were right on top of them. "We're not going up there," I said. "Just to the fence," Mara said. I don't want to go inside. Come on, Luis pleaded. I drove 8 hours to stand in a driveway? I knew that if I stayed in the truck, I would never hear the end of it. I knew that if I went up there, I would hear something else. The prairie does this thing. It empties out every other sound except your own breath, and then it gives your breath back to you a second later from somewhere behind you. It's not an echo exactly. It's more like the land is practicing how you sound. We grabbed our flashlights. I told them both to keep their hands in their pockets if they could, to not touch anything. I don't know why I said it. It felt like the right kind of superstition, not a big one, like not stepping on a grave or whistling in a theater. The fence was more suggestion than barrier, wire sagging between crooked posts. Beyond it, the ground rose in a slow swell. The grass up top was shorter, trimmed by goats or by the wind's teeth. As our lights touched the stones, details popped, lichen like fossilized sea spray, bullet pox, names rubbed down to initials. The dates on some of them were before the Civil War. A few were so recent they made me uncomfortable. 2016, 2019, proof that this wasn't just a ruins. Somebody still buried their dead here. The rectangle that had looked like a foundation was exactly that, the footprint of a building that was no longer there. In one corner, a chunk of wall stood up like a broken knuckle. The mortar looked melted. I aimed my light into the empty space where a doorway might have been and felt my mouth go dry. It was just a cut in the night, but it felt like stepping too close to the recipe of how night is made. Hey, Luis whispered, the showman suddenly gone. He knelt by a stone set a little apart from the others. This one's, I think this is it. It? I asked. The witch's grave, he said. But it came out in a thread of breath like he didn't want the stone to hear. The marker was small and mean, no grand angel or carved willow, just a puckered slab with an engraving that had once been crisp, but now looked like a claw had dragged across it. Someone had left a little bundle of twigs tied with red string at the base. Don't leave offerings, I thought, and then wondered why my brain chose the word offerings. Mara stood beside me, hands deep in her sweater sleeves. I don't like this, she said. We can go, I offered, relief flooding so fast it made me lightheaded. Wait, Luis said. He raised his phone with the flashlight on and angled it down. Is that water? At the bottom edge of the stone, a dark bulge had gathered. A blister where something slick tried to push out of the rock. It looked like oil. The temperature dropped all at once, not like a breeze, but like a door closing in a refrigerated room. My breath fogged. Mara took a step back and bumped against me. The ground under my boots felt soft, like the first step onto a wet sponge. It's Halloween, Luis whispered, like he'd just remembered. It's midnight, isn't it? He checked his phone. 11:58. Let's go, I said, louder than I intended. We started down the hill and got 5 steps before the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Everything in the grass froze. The sound withdrew like water shushing back from a beach. My ears rang in the sudden vacuum. Then from somewhere under us, under the hill, under the bones and the root systems and the old stones, I heard laughter. You know how sometimes a memory of laughter keeps the happiness of the moment in it? This laughter had no happiness at all. It wasn't even human in the way it hit my nerves. It was the shape of laughter without the meaning. It sounded like the earth was running a joke through its mouth just to hear the shape of it. Mara latched onto my arm. Luis stood motionless, head tilted like a deer. His phone's light jittered and then steadied. He mouthed, "Do you hear?" The stone behind us made a wet sound like somebody squeezing a soaked towel in their fist. I didn't look back at it. I don't know how I knew not to, but I knew. We kept moving. The fence's dark line got closer. The truck, a rectangle of safe metal and a dashboard smell of coffee and oil, waited at the bottom like a friend with its hands in its pockets. We reached the fence and stepped over. When my boot touched the road, the wind started again all at once, hard enough to shove me forward. I stumbled, got my balance, and turned to make sure Mara was okay. She was shaking, but okay. Luis climbed over, dropped, and, because he can never leave well enough alone, he held his phone high and took one last photo of the hill. The flash went off. White, then black. In the after image burned into my eyes. Every stone on the hill looked closer than it had a second before. We piled into the truck. I started the engine and pointed us back toward the highway. No one said anything for a mile. The laughter hadn't repeated. But the pitch of the wind was wrong, a thin whine like a tea kettle that never tipped. After a while, I realized I was driving 10 miles under the limit. I forced myself to press the gas. "You got the photo?" Mara asked finally, voice tiny. Luis opened his gallery. The first image was just darkness. He swiped. The second was the flash. Grass frozen white, a smear of headstones like bad teeth, and in the upper right, a streak that might have been a bug or a trick of the lens. But I knew bugs and tricks. I've photographed deer in high beams, oil stains that look like continents, my own reflection in a screen door. And I've never had a picture that made my skin try to step away from my bones. "Is that a face?" Mara whispered. "It's nothing," I said too quickly. The streak had the suggestion of cheekbones, and in the streak were lines like scratches, and the scratches grouped. You know the feeling when you're not supposed to understand a thing, but your brain keeps constructing it anyway? We didn't go back to the motel. We drove straight to the farmhouse, locked ourselves in, and sat in the kitchen with mugs of powdered cocoa I found in a drawer. Every time the wind hit the house, the wood frame talked to itself. The doors breathed. I wanted to blame the cocoa for keeping me awake, but it wasn't the cocoa. At 2:03 a.m., the faucet in the sink made a hiccuping noise, and a thread of black water dribbled out, staining the porcelain like ink. The three of us stood and watched it in silence. It was such a small thing. If you had told me that morning that at 2 a.m. in my aunt's cold kitchen I would be paralyzed by a drop of water, I would have laughed like a sane person. But the drop sat there, refusing to feather or bleed the way normal water does. It thickened. It quivered. It split cleanly into two. "Turn it on," Luis whispered. "No," I said. He reached past me and turned the faucet handle himself. The pipes groaned, then caught. Regular water came out in a thin silver stream as if nothing unusual had ever happened. The black drops stuck to the sink until the water broke them and dragged thin trails toward the drain, where they disappeared so cleanly you'd think they chose to go. When we turned the tap off, the thin metal smell of old water stayed in the air. None of us slept. At daybreak, we filled the truck and drove back to Texas in a nervous, stumbling marathon. Every time a semi passed, I told myself the shudder in the wheel was the crosswind. Every time the clouds gathered, I watched for darker threads, the way a kid watches for snakes in a swimming hole. Now here's where I need you to keep holding my hand and stay with me. It would be easy to say nothing else happened, that the scare wore off, that life returned to parts and pieces and bills and work. I wanted that so badly that I invented it. For 2 weeks I invented it. I told myself the nights were quiet. I told myself I didn't hear scratching in the crawl space under my rental. I told myself the stain in my bathroom sink was iron. I told myself the voice that sounded exactly like my mother calling my name. From the backyard at midnight, a mother who lives 300 miles away was a dream. It wasn't until the 3rd week, when Mara called me crying from her apartment in Austin, that I stopped pretending. She said she had heard laughter through the ceiling fan while she was in the shower. Not the TV next door, not the guys upstairs. Laughter like someone whispering a joke through cloth. She said there was a mark on her ceiling, a tiny dark teardrop shape that wouldn't paint over. "Let's go to church," I told her. I don't usually say things like that. We grew up Easter and Christmas, but it came out of my mouth before I could taste it. She surprised me by saying, "Okay." We went to St. Mary's on a Sunday morning. The service was calm. A baby cried. The priest spoke like he was comforting a frightened horse. After, I asked if I could talk to him. We sat in his office that smelled like old paper. I told him most of it. Not the photo, not the sink. He listened without interrupting, hands folded, thumb rubbing the edge of his wedding band. When I finished, he nodded once, like a teacher acknowledging he had truly heard his student. "Sometimes places keep stories," he said. "And sometimes stories keep places. I don't pretend to know which you've tangled with. But if you've tied something to yourself, it rarely helps to play tug-of-war with it." "What does help?" I asked. "Light," he said. "Routine, people, don't isolate. And stay away from the place you found it. Don't pick at the scab." I did what he said for a while. I kept my lights on. I ate on a schedule even when it all tasted like cardboard. I called friends. I went to the gym and did slow laps like an elderly man. For a week, nothing happened. The stain in the bathroom seemed to fade. Then Halloween rolled around again. Luis called me the night before. He never ever talks about that photo, which is how I know it still lives in his phone. He said, "You're not going anywhere tomorrow, right?" "No," I said. "You?" He laughed, forced. "Hell no." "Good. I said, and we both pretended that was the end of it. I was home alone Halloween night because I'd traded shifts and worked the morning. I bought candy anyway and left the porch light on. 4 kids came by in the first hour. I complimented a homemade ghost that was literally a pillowcase with holes in it. Round 9 it got quiet. I turned on a dumb movie with loud music to drown out the wind. At 11:50 the porch light flickered and went out. Not the lamp. The bulb itself died. I leaned out to check and felt a push of cool air roll through the hallway behind me. My bathroom door clicked as if pressure was easing on it. The bathroom is on the other side of the house. A normal person would have thought the AC kicked on. I checked the thermostat anyway. It read 73, it was off. My phone buzzed. A text from Mara. "Please answer if you're awake." I called immediately. She picked up. I could hear her apartment humming in that way quiet places do, like every plugged-in thing is secretly alive. "Don't hang up," she said. "Just stay on the line. What's happening?" I kept my voice steady. "That's Big Brother code. It's in the sink again," she said. It keeps coming out black and then it looks like water again. It's like it's thick and it thins. And I can hear," her breath hitched. "Jake, I can hear laughing through the vent." 57. I looked at my bathroom. The door, cracked 2 inches, showed me a slice of mirror. I could see the corner of the sink. There was a dark mark in the bowl. I don't know when I started walking, but I was suddenly in the doorway. The mark in my sink was the same shape as Mara's, a teardrop. It trembled like a muscle, trying not to spasm. "Don't look at it," I told her, though I was staring. "Just don't look. We'll stay on the phone. We'll talk about anything else." "Tell me a story," she said, and she laughed nervously, which made me want to cry because it sounded so frightened. I told her about the time we were kids and we tried to sled down the ditch embankment on a piece of cardboard after the rare Texas dusting. I told her how Dad yelled because we were cold and stupid and ecstatic. I told her how we used to climb the hackberry tree and dare each other to jump into the goat pen. I talked fast, like speed could clog the pipes in the world. The dark drop in the sink quivered, fattened, split. The clock on my stove ticked over to 12. The laughter started low, the way a refrigerator hum can sound like a voice if you're sleep deprived. Then it sharpened. It didn't come through the vent or the wall. It came from inside the sink. I know how insane that sounds, I know. But it came up through the metal, up through the drain, and it sounded like it was delighted to be here, like we had set a place for it at the table, and it was finally sitting down. I turned away. I made myself leave the room. I walked back to the living room and stood in the middle of the floor with all the lights on, my phone pressed to my ear, my sister breathing on the other end like a runner at the finish line, and the laughter sank away the way sounds do when you drive past them. By 12:02 it was gone. We didn't say anything for a long time. When we finally spoke, it was small talk about work we barely remember. We stayed on the phone until 1:00. Then we said goodnight without saying goodnight. Since then, nothing huge has happened. No poltergeist polka. No tall figure in the doorway. But I keep finding that shape, the teardrop, in places you don't expect. In coffee rings, in oil spots under my truck, in the water stain on my bedroom ceiling that wasn't there last week. A month ago, a new guy started at work, a welder named Barry from Lawrence, Kansas. We got to talking. He asked where I'd been lately, and I said without thinking, "Kansas, kind of near Topeka." He nodded and said, "You ever stop in Stull?" The way he asked it, like you might ask if I ever tried the pie at a diner, casual but with a lid on it, made my hands feel like they weren't mine. "Once," I said carefully. "Halloween. Last year." He smiled in a way that wasn't a smile. "Don't do that," he said. "My cousin did that when we were kids. He was never right after." He wiped his hands on a rag. Thing about that place is, it's not the place. It's the way it sits. Some towns are built on good ground, some on bad. Stull's on a bruise. He folded the rag like a flag. You press a bruise, it remembers your finger. I asked him what happened to his cousin. He shrugged. He hears things, sees things, got a mark that won't quit. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. He glanced at my hands and I put them in my pockets like a guilty kid. I thought about posting this for a long time and didn't. Then tonight, I came home to find a single red string tied around the knob of my back door. It was a small loop, like someone had tied off a bundle of twigs and the string got left behind. I swear on my sister's life I didn't touch it. I went out the front door instead, and spent 2 hours at a Whataburger with a book I didn't read. When I finally went back, the string was gone. The door was still locked. The house smelled faintly like wet stone. So this is me, pressing the bruise with words, hoping that maybe the bruise belongs to someone else too and we can compare the ache. I know some of you are going to say we made our own trouble by stepping over a sagging wire fence and standing on a hill where we weren't invited. You won't be wrong. If you're reading this and you've got a friend like Luis or a sister like Mara, or a voice like mine saying just a quick look, just to the fence, just a joke, don't listen. Halloween isn't a holiday up there. It's a door on a hinge. There's one more thing and then I'll leave you alone. Luis texted me 3 nights ago. He doesn't like talking about it, like I said, but he sent a photo and the little typing dots came and went like he was arguing with himself. The photo was his bathroom mirror fogged from a shower. In the fog, a streak had run, thin and dark, not like clear water. It had separated into 3 parallel lines for a moment, and then drawn itself back together at the bottom into a teardrop. Under the picture, he wrote, "I dreamed last night that we were back there, up on the hill, and it was laughing, and for a second, just a second, I laughed too." I typed, "Don't go back," and he didn't answer. I don't know if he needed to. We're not going back. We're not those idiots anymore standing in the wind underneath a sky full of old electricity. We're smarter now. We leave the porch light on and keep to the lit parts of town and stop our ears like kids in a storm. But every Halloween, right before midnight, I turn off every tap in the house and sit on the floor with the lights on and the TV too loud and my phone in my hand. I wait out 11:58, 11:59, 12, like the world is holding its breath. And even if the sink stays quiet and the air stands still and the bruise doesn't show, I can feel the hill under every yard in this country, a shallow skull we built our lives upon, and I hear the ground practicing how we sound when we laugh. If you've ever been to Stull, if you've ever stood at that fence and promised yourself you'd just look, and if you've heard it, from the church that isn't there, from the stone that bleeds black water like it's remembering something, from the soil itself, then you know. You carry it home in a thimble. It waits in the pipes. It learns your routine. It doesn't need to knock. It already has a key. And if I ever forget that, if I ever think about driving north again some bright October and trying to prove to myself it was just the wind in the grass, I'll open my faucet at noon on a normal blue sky day and watch the water and wait for it to darken. I'll wait for the sound to travel up. I don't think it ever really went back where it came from. I think a year ago on a hill outside a near-empty Kansas town, we pressed a bruise, and the bruise pressed back. And now in kitchens and bathrooms and quiet bedrooms where the lights are always just a little bit too bright, it's practicing how we laugh, and it's getting better. My name is Caleb Hart, and I'm from Beaumont, Texas. I fix AC units for a living. I'm not a writer, I'm not a ghost hunter, and I don't go looking for trouble with the dead. I'm posting this because I can't get the smell of swamp rot out of my house no matter how many times I mop. And because when I close my eyes, I still see that grin. This started last September, when the air felt like soup and the afternoons blew up into thunder almost every day. My sister Leah was working on a podcast episode about American ghost towns and southern curses. She'd read about Frenier, the town the 1915 hurricane wiped off the map, and wanted a cheap, gritty segment to balance out her more polished interviews. My best friend Derek had a John boat and a need for gas money. So we set out like idiots with a cooler, 2 lanterns, a phone recorder, and the kind of confidence you get when you've never seen real consequences. We drove from Beaumont along I-10, dipped south where the road skims water on both sides, and rolled into a bait shop near Manchac just before dusk. The front porch boards were damp, the screen door screamed, and inside everything smelled like old ice and wet wood. The woman behind the counter went by Miss Celestine. She had a face like a walnut and a white braid thick as rope. When Leah asked about tours, Miss Celestine waved her hand like she was batting at a fly. "You don't need a tour," she said. "You need to keep to the channel. Keep the cypress on your port side and don't be out there after the church bells." "You hear me?" "Church bells?" Derek asked, smirking. "Out here?" She didn't smile back. "You'll hear them. That don't mean a church is ringing." Leah pressed with a reporter's patience. "Have you heard of a priestess who cursed the swamp?" "We read about someone named Maman Celeste." The old woman's eyes flicked up, quick and sharp. "People put my auntie's name on things they don't understand." She tapped a glass jar full of red string and bottle caps. You respect what you find out there. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't break what you didn't tie. We got 2 lanterns, extra fuel, and plastic ponchos. Outside, the sky felt heavy. Cicadas rattled like coins in a dryer. We shoved off and let the outboard grunt us into a green hallway of water and limbs. Cypress knees poked up like knuckles. The air tasted like salt and pennies. The only light came from our lanterns bouncing gold on the surface. Leah had her phone out, recording. "We're in Manchac Swamp," she whispered like the swamp cared. "Local time is about 7:45. You can hear the frogs," it was true. Frogs, crickets, mosquitoes that sounded like guitar strings. "We're here to talk about Frenier, destroyed in the 1915 hurricane. Legend says a woman—" "Don't say her name again," I told her. "You already poked the bear." Derek laughed and cut the motor down to a lazy thrum. "Relax. We'll grab 20 minutes of spooky audio and I'll have you 2 back eating boudin balls by 9. We drifted around a bend where the trees stood wider, the water deeper and darker. A cottonmouth slid off a branch without a ripple. Spanish moss hung like old lace. I leaned over to check the fuel can, and that's when I saw it. White just below the surface, pale as a sheet under glass. "Hold up," I said. "What is that?" Derek idled. Our lanterns drew the shape into color, into lines. At first it looked like a sack snagged on a root. Then the current lifted it by inches. A hand rose, fingertips puckered but not bloated, the nails clean, the skin smooth like wax. A face followed. Pale hair slicked back by water, eyes closed, and the mouth stretched wide into a grin so big you could see the gums. The lips were tight, dark at the corners, as if stitched that way once but not anymore. Leah sucked in air. "Oh my God." "Back up," I said, but the outboard coughed and died. The boat rocked. Lantern light shook across that face. The grin didn't waver. We weren't the first to touch him. A nylon net, newer than everything else here, had wrapped around the body's chest and hips. It had snagged on a cypress knee, pinning him just below the surface like a fish on a line. I grabbed the boat hook and nudged the net free, trying not to touch skin. It felt wrong, like moving a sleeping person who might wake up mad. "Call somebody," I told Leah. She had bars. Her voice trembled when she told the dispatcher we'd found a body. The woman said a deputy would meet us at the landing if we could tow the net in, and to leave everything else how we found it. "I'm not dragging a corpse," Derek said, quiet, almost to himself. He gunned the motor. It coughed again and quit like something had pinched the fuel line. The frogs went silent, like someone had put a lid on the world. Leah whispered, "Do you smell that?" The air had changed. It had gone from rot to something sweet like gardenia, but with a trace of meat behind it, the kind of wrong sweet you get in a funeral home where the AC can't keep up. I kept the boat hook between the corpse and us. In the lantern light, the grin seemed to tilt wider, just a hair. The skin wasn't mush. It wasn't swollen like the drownings I'd seen in news photos. If anything, the man looked preserved. Clean-shaven, a small scar under the jaw, a chain around his neck with a metal charm. His clothes were dark and old-fashioned, white shirt, suspenders, and not eaten through. His eyes stayed shut. A small burlap bag was tied to his wrist with faded red string. "Don't break what you didn't tie," Miss Celestine had said. "Let's cut the net at the root," I said, voice shaking. "We free it from the tree but leave the wrap on him. Then we can push him into the channel and let the water carry him out." "We can't just let a body float," Leah said. "They need his name." As if he heard, something bumped our hull from below. One knock on the aluminum, then another, light but firm. Derek cursed and leaned back to check the motor again. The fuel line was fine. The prop was clear. He pulled the cord and the engine caught, but low and sick. The knocks came again, 3 in a row this time, like a polite hand at a door. We didn't speak. We sliced the net where it snagged on the knee and eased the boat away. The corpse hovered, then drifted with us as if the current had tightened. The grin held. The red string on the wrist gleamed wet, delicate as a vein. At the landing, yellow tape went up fast. Deputy Arnaud looked like a man who'd had a long week for 30 years. He eyed the body, the net, and us with the same flat stare. "Fellas," he said, nodding to me and Derek, then gentler, "Ma'am." He peered at the face for 5 seconds that felt like an hour. "Looks like he didn't bloat." "That's funny." We told him what we'd done. He asked if we'd touched the wrist. We told him no. He looked hard at the little bag and the thread. "Well," he said finally, "we'll let the coroner handle this." A coroner's van backed up, and a man in blue gloves came out with a clipboard. He was younger and tried for a joke. Another smiling gator, huh? The deputy didn't crack. A handful of people had drifted onto the gravel, locals from the bar, the bait shop maybe. They watched in quiet, arms crossed. I recognized Miss Celestine. Her eyes were on the red string, then on me. She shook her head once. It didn't feel like scolding. It felt like pity. The coroner asked if there was next of kin to notify. An older man at the edge of the group spoke up. He had a beard like steel wool and a cap with an oil company logo. That's Harlan Pike, he said. Been dead a long time, sir? The deputy asked. He ran logging camps near Frenier, the man said, staring at the grin as if it remembered him. He took money from a lot of folks. Took other things too. They said he swallowed. He crossed a woman he shouldn't have. After the storm, we never found him. Guess he found us. The deputy cleared his throat. Let's keep the stories down for now. But it was a story, and you can't keep those down in a place where the trees remember. That night, Leah met me and Derek at the motel next to the truck stop. We ate red beans out of takeout cups with plastic spoons. Rain rattled the window unit. Leah had her recorder out. Is it wrong to use this? She asked, voice small. Maybe just talk it out, I said. For yourself. She hit record and spoke softly about the body, the grin, the red string. She said the name Maman Celeste again and I winced. Sorry, she said, but it's part of it. The AC coughed and whined and went quiet for 2 seconds before it caught again. In that gap, the room felt too tight, like the paint had a smell. An oily sweetness threaded through the mildew, the same wrong gardenia from the water. Derek got up and checked the door latch like that would do anything. We meant to drive home the next morning. We didn't. We went back to the bait shop because it felt like leaving without saying goodbye would make the smell follow us forever. Miss Celestine didn't act surprised. She set a plate of beignets on the counter and slid a bottle of vinegar across to me like a priest giving medicine. You cut the net but not the tie, she said. That's something. Who was he? Leah asked, careful with her words. Pike, she said. He promised my auntie things. Protection, payment, mercy. She gave him a charm to carry so the swamp would bear his weight. He used her, put his hands where they didn't belong, and left his promise in the mud. The storm didn't kill those people by itself. People walked them into that storm with lies. Her eyes went far. When the water came, it came for the ones who used the swamp and didn't return what they took. What about the grin? Derek asked. Miss Celestine's face didn't change. Some mouths don't close until the promise is kept, Leah said. The bag on his wrist. Don't break what you didn't tie, she repeated. And don't carry what's not yours. We left it alone. We tried to. The deputy told us to stay in town one more night in case the coroner had questions. We killed time by riding out toward the old rail bed, where the swamp opens into a wide sheet of black water. A man in a flat-bottom boat passed us and told us to turn back because a storm was building. We laughed like tourists. Then the sky turned the color of a bruise. Rain came all at once, angry and hot. We huddled in the truck. After 10 minutes, it ended like someone flipped a switch, but the air stayed wrong. All the birds had gone quiet again. Even the mosquitoes felt like they were watching us instead of biting. That was when Leah found the locket. We'd pulled over near a stump with old nails in it, maybe someone's dock once. A glint sat half buried in the mud by my tire. Leah reached down and lifted a little oval on a chain, black with tarnish. Inside, behind clouded glass, was a button-sized photo of a girl with her hair in a bow. The other side held a pressed bit of something brown and brittle, maybe a leaf, maybe hair. It must have washed up, Leah said. I can research the family. I don't take it, I said, louder than I meant. The back of my neck burned. I swear the air dimmed when she closed her fingers around the locket. It's just a piece of metal, Caleb. Derek put his hands up. We can leave it at the bait shop. Tell Miss C where we found it. But we didn't drive there right away. We drove to the motel because we were wet and tired. We told ourselves we'd drop it by in the morning. We told ourselves it was just a trinket. I slept badly. I dreamed I was wading in warm, knee-high water and stepping on mouths instead of roots. Each mouth smiled and let me stand on it, polite as a host, until the jaws closed and I fell. I woke to someone humming. It was a woman's voice, low and warm, not English. The AC had cut off again. The room smelled like fresh flowers at first. Then the smell curdled like the bouquet had sat in sun. The humming didn't come from the wall or the vent. It came from the sink. Leah was in the bathroom with the light off, the door cracked. "Leah?" I said. No answer. I got up, nudged the door open. The sink faucet was on, a thin stream. Leah stood staring at the water. The locket chain hung out of her fist, dripping. She looked half asleep. "Hey," I said. "You're freaking me out." She blinked herself awake. I dreamed I had to wash it. She shivered and shut the water off. The humming quit. We stared at the drain. The smell got stronger. We drove to the bait shop as the sun came up bloody red over the lake. The blessing of familiar noises had returned. Boat motors, men hollering, gulls. Inside, Miss Celestine saw the locket and made a sound deep in her throat. "Where?" Leah told her. She nodded once. "That's not his," she said. "It's hers." She tapped the locket. "My auntie kept this, wore it when she worked. It was her mother's before that." She pointed at Leah's damp hand. "And now you've washed it in a place that's not yours to wash things. Do you see where the road goes? We can bring it back," Leah said quickly. "We'll take it to, I don't know, where would your aunt have? Where the water broke," she said. "At the bones," Derek whispered. "Island of bones." She didn't smile. "Back of the logging road where the oaks went down all at once. You'll know it by the birds. We shouldn't have gone." We went. She refused to come with us. She said it was our hands now and our promise to keep. "If you hear the bells," she added at the door, "don't answer them." We set out at noon, even though any swamp man would tell you noon is a bad time to be anywhere but in shade. The humidity had weight to it. The channel narrowed to a place where the water looked like old coffee. Cypress knees crowded us. Egrets watched from branches, still as carved ivory. They didn't call, just stared. By the time we found the fallen oaks, clouds had stacked into blue-black towers. The trees lay like giants, roots exposed. Dirt and bones snarled together. I mean that literally, bones. So white they looked fake until you leaned in and saw the smooth curves of ribs, the channels in a skull. They were tangled in roots like hair in a comb. "Is this legal?" Derek asked, voice thready. "To have this. Just out here. Storm takes what it wants," I said. The air shifted, the silence, the pressure in my ears. Then I did hear bells, thin and far like a church in a neighboring town if sound could travel through water. 3 notes and then 3 again. Leah dug in her bag and pulled out the locket. It was dry as if it had never touched water. The little photo had cleared. The girl was plainer, more real. She looked like the girls who stocked shelves at the Piggly Wiggly when I was a kid. Cheeks a little uneven, hair fly away. The other side held a scrap of something I now knew wasn't a leaf. "Put it down and say you're sorry," I said, throat tight. "To who?" "To whoever is listening." She laid the locket on a bare root and whispered apologies to a woman whose name she didn't know. The bells rang again, closer, and something knocked under the boat hull even though we were beached. One knock, then another, and then the slow sound of something big moving in shallow water. A head rose from behind a tangle of roots. For a second my brain said alligator. The eyes were low, the skin wet. Then the face angled toward us, and I saw a man's forehead and hair plastered like he'd combed it back with oil. The water slid off his cheeks without leaving them shiny. He moved like someone wading on the warm bottom, not like something floating. He stood and his shirt hung off him in neat folds, and his mouth smiled like a saint on a cheap prayer card, all teeth, nothing soft, like you could fit a peach inside it. Leah whimpered. Derek said a curse and then, like it mattered, said, "Sorry, I didn't have a prayer ready. I had the boat hook." It shook in my hands. The man stepped closer in the waist-high water and raised his wrist. The bag tied there with red string gleamed. He touched the locket like he was counting rosary beads. His eyes stayed closed, lashes blue-black against white skin. His grin never dipped. "Take it," Leah said, voice breaking. She picked up the locket and reached toward him. The bells stopped. The air thinned until my ears popped. She set the locket on his open palm. The smile didn't change, but something in his jaw did. It lowered by a fraction, like a door settling on its hinges. A wind sprang up. It rolled the top layer of swamp water into a pattern, circles inside circles going the wrong direction. The sound of rain came from far away. The egrets looked away as if embarrassed. The man closed his hand around the locket and turned his wrist, showing us the red string. It wasn't just tied at his wrist. It ran under his sleeve, up toward his shoulder as if it led into him, deeper than skin. When he turned, I saw the knot, and forgive me, an itch ran down my spine, ugly and fast. I wanted to see what the bag held. I wanted to know how he worked. I wanted to untie one loop and watch something change. He must have felt that. His head cocked, and for the first time the grin shifted toward me. Not bigger, not smaller, sharper. He lifted his free hand and curled his fingers in a "come here" that was both friendly and absolute. I took a step without wanting to. The muck held my boots. Derek grabbed the back of my shirt and hissed, "Don't." Leah said my name like she was crying. The bells clanged once, hard enough to rattle my teeth. A branch fell somewhere behind us with a crack. The wind flipped our ponchos like flags. The man tilted his head back, and for half a heartbeat his eyes opened. Black from lid to lid, all pupil, no white. And I smelled gardenia so strong it hurt. I found my voice. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it like a child. "We cut the net. We brought back the locket. We shouldn't have touched anything. We'll leave." He lowered his head. The smile softened, not like a human face softens, but like the edges of something in water go less sharp. He turned away without a ripple and sank. We waited. 5 minutes, 10, the wind fell. The regular swamp sounds came back. The world remembered how to be itself. The locket was no longer on the root. The red string at his wrist under the water was there and not there, like color under a thin membrane. "We're done," Leah whispered. "We go home." We did. We drove back to Texas that afternoon without speaking much. Every puddle along the shoulder looked too deep. Every ditch was a mouth. The radio kept catching pieces of preacher shows and Zydeco like the stations were all on top of each other. At home, my apartment smelled like my apartment again. I bleached the sink and mopped. I threw my boots out. For a week, I told myself whatever had happened was just heat and bad timing. I tried to be logical. The human brain makes patterns. The swamp has gases that do things to you. The old stories are there because confirmation bias is real. Then the knocks started. It's a different sound here, in a second-floor walk-up with tight pipes and a good roof. It isn't wood. It's water. 3 taps in my sink, then 3 in the tub, as if someone were knocking from the drain. The AC in my bedroom cuts out for exactly 2 seconds at 3:15 a.m. every night. I timed it. In those 2 seconds, the air goes still and the smell rolls over me. Gardenia first, then the sweet of rot underneath. It goes away when the fan catches, but the walls keep a memory of it. On Tuesday, I woke to damp footprints on my hallway tile. Not muddy, just a darker gray in the shape of bare feet that dried as I stared. On Thursday, my downstairs neighbor texted to ask if I had a leak, because he heard water humming through his pipes at odd hours like someone running a faucet and singing while they did it. Leah's show never aired that episode. She says her producer didn't buy it, but I think the reason is simpler. She's sleeping with the light on. She called me 2 nights ago to say the locket's picture is clearer now than every other photo in her house. Like the glass polished itself. When she put it in a drawer with dryer sheets, everything in that drawer smelled like flowers in August within an hour. Also, she has a new superstition about not walking under doorknobs because she's convinced something near her mouth will make her smile in a way that isn't hers. Derek sold the John boat. The guy who bought it brought cash and a friend. The next morning, Derek found a red piece of thread wound into his gear shift, knotted in a way neither of us could tie on purpose. He took an Uber the rest of the week. I went back to church last Sunday. I sat in back because I didn't know if I was there to pray or to hide. The pastor preached about promises in this soft, syrupy voice, and every time he said the word, my mouth felt dry. I went up after and asked if he thought curses and blessings are the same thing from different angles. He said it was an interesting question. He asked if I wanted to talk to a counselor. I said no. That would be a tidy ending if I were the kind of person who learned the lesson and kept his hands off the knot. But I need to say the other part out loud. When we brought the locket back to the root and the man turned his wrist, the knot in the red thread lay right on top of the scar under his jaw. I thought about how my fingers know the slick path a wire takes through a condenser unit the first time I open the panel. I thought about how things are made, how they come apart, how they come back. I wanted to know if his smile was a hinge and if the hinge had a pin. Back in Beaumont, I rose at 2 in the morning one night, and to this day I don't know why I did it. But I think you already know. I took my Leatherman and I went to the sink. I unscrewed the trap. It groaned, old metal, cold water. Something slipped onto my wrist in the spill, soft and wet, as if a piece of string had been waiting inside the curve of the pipe. It rapped once and went still. I stood there with black water dripping on my bare feet and the smell filling my little kitchen, and I pressed my finger under the thread like a guy testing a wire he knows is live. I told myself I was curious. I told myself I was in control. I pinched the thread and pulled a little. It gave slick and burned my skin. Across the room, my bathroom mirror faced the hall just right so I could see the doorway. For a blink, my own reflection smiled too wide. Not so anyone walking by would notice, just enough that my lips felt held open by a thumb I couldn't see. I let go. The thread fell slack around my wrist like a wet hair and slid into the trap with a sound like a sigh. The AC cut out for 2 seconds. The bells rang once, muffled through walls. All day at work the next day, the humidity felt wrong, even in houses with brand new systems. Customers told me it was like the air wouldn't dry. My gauges read normal. When I bent to pull a drain line, I smelled gardenia and brackish water, and the inside of old wood that's been damp for a century. It followed me out to the truck and rode shotgun like a friend. I don't know what the man in the swamp wanted beyond the locket. Maybe that was enough. Maybe the smile is a warning and not a threat. Maybe every time I smell the sour sweet, I'm smelling a mercy I don't deserve. Or maybe I'm inching my way toward a promise I didn't know I made when I cut that net and looked too long at a knot that wasn't mine to untie. If you go out there, don't go at dusk. Don't say the wrong names out loud. If something stirs the water under your boat and knocks politely 3 times, don't answer. If you find something that isn't yours, leave it where the roots can hold it. And if you hear bells out across the flat black water when there ain't a church for miles, understand that sound doesn't care about distance in places where the ground remembers your weight. Most of all, and I'm saying this like a man telling his friend not to touch a hot stove, if a face rises smooth below your lantern and smiles with closed eyes, don't be brave and don't be curious. Be humble. Put back what you took. Keep your mouth shut. Don't break what you didn't tie. I'm heading back to Louisiana next week. Leah says that's a bad idea, and Derek says he won't come. They're both probably right, but some mouths don't close until the promise is kept. I tried to sleep last night and the AC hiccuped, and I heard the humming in the pipe again, a woman's voice that sounded somehow kind. I don't want someone else finding what I left undone. I don't want that grin to turn toward anybody I love. If I get there and all I find is wind in the moss and a root that looks a little like a hand, I'll count that as a blessing. If I get there and the water bulges with a welcoming shape and the bells say come home, I'll bring flowers that can handle salt and speak my apology slow. I'll keep my hands where they can be seen. I'll say the simple truth in a place that doesn't need stories. I'm sorry. I carried what wasn't mine. I saw where the road goes. I'm here to return it. If I'm lucky, the air will shift and the birds will look away like they do when something private is happening, and I'll feel the knot under my fingers loosen and drift, and the smile will soften like a wave losing its shape on the sand. I'll leave the way we should have left the first time, quiet, grateful, and light. If I'm not lucky, you'll smell something sweet when the AC cuts out and water will hum in your pipes, and you'll remember a guy from Beaumont you never met telling you not to answer when the bells ring. And when you look in the mirror at night and check your mouth for a shape that doesn't belong to you, you'll know I didn't keep my promise fast enough. That's all I've got. The walls are breathing easy for now. The air feels normal again, but it's only 9, and the hour I'm worried about hasn't rolled around. If, at 3:15, the AC stutters and the smell comes like it always does, I'll take that as a reminder, not a threat. I'll pack a bag. I'll put a handful of gardenia petals in my pocket, because I read somewhere that a gift should carry a little of the trouble it hopes to fix. And when I get to Manchac, I'll watch the lantern light wobble on the dark water, and I'll try not to humanize what isn't human. I'll listen for the bells and keep my mouth still. I'll be the smallest thing in that giant breathing place. And if I do it right, maybe the smile that isn't mine will finally fade. Or maybe it won't. Some things out there aren't curses. They're just the swamp remembering what you promised. My name is Daniel Cruz, and I'm from Jackson Heights in Queens. I don't usually write stuff like this, and if any of my old crew sees this, I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. I just need to put it somewhere that isn't my head, because at night, when the trucks die down on Northern Boulevard and the planes take that long curve over LaGuardia, I can still hear the tapping under my floor like rain that doesn't belong to weather. I work construction management. Not glamorous. I'm the guy who stands with a clipboard at the chain link fence, yelling about hard hats and dust monitors, making sure we're not about to collapse a trench or back the excavator into a parked Civic. In June, we broke ground on a 5-story mixed-use over on a narrow lot near Astoria Boulevard. It used to be a parking strip, then a bodega with a leaky roof, then nothing for years. The developer had his permits. The survey looked clean. The usual utility marks sprayed like modern cave drawings across the asphalt. You'd think it was straightforward. First morning, we sawed a grid into the blacktop. It was already 80 by 8 a.m., the kind of city heat where even the pigeons look mad. The steel teeth threw sparks. The asphalt rolled up like a black rug with little stones stuck in the weave. Under it was compacted fill and the old brick of some earlier foundation. The excavator operator, Thomas, started scooping. The dirt down there was this weird sticky gray like wet bread. It smelled mineral and sweet at the same time, like coins and cut flowers. You smell that? He called, idling the bucket. Like a funeral home. I shrugged because I didn't smell anything yet. My mask was on and my coffee had turned everything into burnt sugar. But I did notice the water. Not a lot. Just a shimmer across the bottom of the trench that kept returning even after the pump took care of it. The geotech report said groundwater should be 6 feet deeper. I made a note. I make a lot of notes. It's how I keep my brain quiet. Around 10 a.m., the bucket hit metal. We all felt it through our boots. That hard scrape that's not rock. Thomas cursed and pulled back. The foreman, Reggie, told us to stay clear until we saw what we had. I climbed down, boots sinking a little into the soft gray. The metal wasn't a pipe. It wasn't round. It was shaped. It had this oval curve with seams and bolts like a submarine, but smaller. About 6 feet long, 2.5 wide, with a bulged top and narrow ends. Thomas leaned the bucket over it and washed it with the hose. Dirt slid away. The thing was rust rose with patches of dull graphite. A few pitted areas like acne scars. On one end, barely above a seam, I saw a small round porthole. Thick glass clouded with grit on the outside. Is that a coffin? Someone said behind me. It was Reggie. He didn't sound like a guy who did roofs in January and laughed at blizzards. He sounded like a kid. I'd seen pictures before online. 19th century iron coffins. Fisk coffins, they called them. The Victorians loved anything that looked like a machine. Airtight. They bragged they could preserve a body perfectly. A lot of them were shaped like that. Anthropoid like a person, but stretched out. That porthole? It was a viewing window. We did the right thing. We stopped, called 311, then DOB, then the number for human remains the city gives you that always sounds like it's for someone else. We set cones and caution tape. I got a stool from the gang box and sat in the shade with my clipboard, guarding our past like a lifeguard who didn't know how to swim. City archaeology came the next afternoon. 2 of them. A woman named Saunders who had those deep frown lines you get from squinting at the ground for 30 years. And a younger guy, Miles, who kept touching the coffin with gloved hands like he wanted to absorb its story through his fingers. They told us to step back and took 1,000 photos. Saunders asked me about the water. I told her it was there before we hit the coffin, and that the pump couldn't keep up. She wrote it down. Was this ever a burial ground? Reggie asked, careful like he was talking to a crossing guard. Everything was a burial ground at one time or another, Saunders said. But yes, there were 19th century potter's fields all over Queens. They got moved, or so the records say. They set up a little tent and ran a handheld laser thing over the surface, then a GPR unit that looked like a baby stroller. The screen was a mess of wavy lines. Miles said something like, "That's interesting," in a tone that meant the opposite. We stopped excavating for 2 days while they filed their reports. The developer was already texting me diagrams and angry emojis. Reggie kept the guys busy cutting rebar and forming on the far side. I hung around the trench making sure the pump didn't choke on a rag or cigarette butt. That's when the smell hit me. Coins and cut flowers, but now with something else underneath, like old perfume you find in a closet in a house you don't know. I went down with a soft brush and started gently clearing the glass of the porthole. I know that's not my job. I told myself it was about documentation. The clay came off in sheets. I used a rag dipped in the trench water because it was there. As I wiped that glass, I thought I saw my hand moving on the other side, like a reflection, but it wasn't my hand. It was small. A child's, I'm not an idiot. I stood up fast. My head hit the excavator's arm and stars popped in my eyes. I blinked. The glass was clouded again from the inside. Condensation. That's all, I told myself. I told myself, condensation like a kid chanting a charm against monsters. That night, we hired a security guard because the developer didn't want some history nerds or TikTok kids sneaking in. The guard was an older guy named Leo, who'd been NYPD in the 90s and wore that knowledge like a jacket he didn't want to take off. He set his folding chair by the trench with a thermos, and I told him not to let anyone near the coffin. He laughed and said he wasn't scared of dead people, only living idiots. When I left, he was humming something, maybe a hymn, eyes on the hole like it might blink. At 2:37 a.m., my phone rang. It was Leo. I kept my ringer on for the job. His voice was thin like I had bad reception, but I was in my kitchen with my modem blinking. "You ever babysit a fish tank?" he asked. "What?" "You tap the glass and they come looking." "You shouldn't tap glass." I was suddenly more awake than coffee ever makes me. "Leo, what's going on?" He hung up. I dressed wrong. Boots without socks, shirt backward, then corrected it and ran down my stairs into the steam and laundry smell of my building. I drove too fast. When I pulled up, the lot was dark. The LED tower was off. The little tent city had set up snapped in the breeze like a flag. Leo's thermos lay on its side, slow dripping coffee into the dirt. His chair was tipped. There were wet marks on the dust like bare feet had walked from the trench to the fence and back. Small feet. My stomach did that thing it does on roller coasters, only this time there was no track and no choice. I flashed my light down into the trench. The coffin was there. The porthole was clear. The glass had a thin mist on it, and behind the mist was a face. A girl's face, pale skin the color of skim milk, lips calm like sleep, hair pulled back tight like they did in daguerreotypes, and eyes. Her eyes were open. I want you to understand something. Eyes don't stay nice. Even preserved, even in closed caskets, they sink and cloud. I went to my grandmother's open casket funeral. I know what dead eyes look like. These weren't like that. They were the gray-blue of gutter ice. They had a line of wet on the lower lids, like she'd just blinked and her tear ducts were still doing their job. The line moved, shimmered. I saw it catch the light. I saw it bead and then run. I turned off the light because that felt polite, and when I turned it on again, the mist on the glass was on the outside. Leo was sitting on the other side of the trench with his back to the dirt and his legs spread like he'd slid down the embankment. He wasn't dead. He was breathing fast and his eyes were open too, but they were looking at nothing. "She knocked," he said. I didn't want to be rude. By the time EMS got there, he was normal enough to be embarrassed. He said he'd tripped. He said there were kids messing around outside the fence. He refused the hospital. I wrote my incident report in words that would get me in the least trouble. Then I went home and put a towel under my front door because I couldn't stop thinking of the smell and how it felt like it was searching for a way in. The next day, Saunders came back with 2 more people and a portable dehumidifier, which I thought was weird, until she told me that these iron coffins weren't always perfectly sealed. "They can create their own climate," she said. "Like a terrarium," Miles whispered, "or a time capsule, like it was romantic." They wanted to move the coffin to a lab. They brought chains and straps and a crate with foam. When the excavator lifted it, the pump groaned and the trench filled in minutes. The water was clear enough to reflect sky. It didn't smell like a sewer or a leak. It smelled like flowers you forget to throw out and find later. The water they've been sitting in, sour, sweet, and metallic. The coffin swung. Miles had his hand on it like a proud dad. He made a joke about the girl being older than all of us, but lighter. The chain creaked. Somebody's radio crackled. It felt like a normal day again with normal dangers, and I let myself breathe. We got the coffin into the crate. Saunders signed a chain of custody sheet. They loaded it into a van that had City University printed on the side in big block letters. Miles waved at me like we were co-conspirators. As they pulled away, the pump coughed and the trench sucked dry like a sink. 2 hours later, Saunders called me from a number I didn't know. "Daniel," she said, "are your guys playing a joke?" "What?" "The crate we picked up at your site? When we opened it at the lab, it was empty." I didn't know what to say. I looked at the trench. Our pump sat still. The water hadn't come back. There was a rectangle in the clay like a missing tooth. I told her maybe Miles had the wrong crate. She said they had checked the video. The feed went fuzzy for 3 minutes. When it came back, the dolly was rolled to the table and there was nothing on it but pooled water. They came back that afternoon with cops who had a tone like, someone's car got stolen, and now it was an insurance problem. Reggie swore. Thomas crossed himself. The hose lay forgotten, snaking toward the trench like a dead green thing. That night I dreamed the girl stood in my kitchen wearing a dull gray dress that ended at her calves. She didn't make sound. Her feet left wet prints on my tile. She looked at my faucet like it was a candle. When I woke up, my refrigerator hummed in a rhythm that sounded like tapping. I tried to keep this all in the column of my life that's labeled work. Like that makes it easier to deal with. I told myself the van got robbed, the crate had been mislogged, there was a mix-up. But then things started to happen that didn't fit the box. The CO monitors on the site would chirp at odd times, not when the equipment was running, but when we were on break and drinking warm Gatorade. The chirp would line up with that tapping sound and then die. The blueprint pinned to the plywood wall changed. I know how that sounds. But look, the drawing we had was a third revision stamped in May. I had redlined it with a Sharpie. The next morning my lines were still there, but the stamp was different. It said 1851 in a fancy script. There were tiny penciled notes in old handwriting. Remove to Corduroy Road and child plot, hold. I thought I was losing it. I called the architect. He laughed, offered to email a new PDF. When it arrived, it looked normal. But when I printed it, the script was back again, faint but there. The copier guy said it was a drum issue. He said that like it explained anything. An older woman from the neighborhood started coming by late afternoons to watch. You see it a lot. People get attached to projects. They treat them like weather. This woman wore a bright headscarf and carried a plastic bag with a loaf of bread in it like talisman. She stood at the fence and stared at the trench even after the coffin was gone. On the third day, I went over and said hello. She didn't smile. You put the child back, she said. You think you did not. But you did. I asked her what she meant. She pressed the bag of bread to the fence. You cannot seal water like a letter. It goes where it knows. It remembers where it was. Her accent made everything sound like a proverb. When I asked her name, she said, "There are no names for this," and walked away. Reggie started getting headaches. Thomas's kid got a rash that looked like lace. Leo quit. He sent a text that said, "No more nights," and then another that said, "She wasn't angry, just patient, but patience is worse because it means time works different where she is." I should have walked. People do. They quit jobs, they sell apartments, they move to Florida. But Queens is the only place that never felt temporary to me. So I stayed. I told myself we were professionals. We pour concrete, not myths. We hit deadlines. Saunders did come back once more with a woman from the ME's office. They took soil samples and scraped a little rust from the trench where the coffin had been. Saunders asked if any of us had been feeling off. I didn't want to be on a list, so I said I was fine. Miles didn't come. Later, I learned he'd requested reassignment and then left to do something with GIS maps upstate. Someone told me he'd started seeing the girl on reflective surfaces, a spoon, a car window, the screen of his phone when it went to black. I don't know if that someone was messing with me. Let me tell you about the day it broke. It was a Tuesday, the kind of hot where the city feels like it's coming through your skin. We had the footings dug and rebar tied. The pump sat ready because the trench had started to weep again. Dark threads stitching up from below. The concrete truck was late. I was on the phone with dispatch trying to sound like I wasn't annoyed when that older woman with the headscarf appeared at the fence again. She had 2 kids with her this time, both boys with scabbed knees. She raised her hand like she was blessing us. The boys were quiet. The excavator's engine ticked as it cooled. For one long second, the lot was so still that the only noise was the thrum of the city like a throat clearing. Then the ground sank. Not a collapse. Not that dramatic. It settled the way a person does into a chair they know too well. The rebar cages dipped. The water rose fast in the trench, clear as the first time, only higher, like it had been waiting behind a door and someone finally slid the bolt. Thomas swore. Reggie ran for the pump. I stepped toward the edge to see where the leak was. As I did, the sound came. A knock, delicate, 3 beats, then a pause, then 3 more. It came from under my boots through the clay that was now the consistency of pudding. The knock wasn't random. It had rhythm. Within it, I heard, I'll say it and you'll think I'm melodramatic, and maybe I am, but I heard the rhythm of heels on wood, not modern tile, wood, slow, measured steps across a plank floor. I staggered. My foot slid. I went down the slope on my side, grabbing at the edge and coming up with a handful of wet earth that striped my fingers silvery. Dan. Reggie shouted, but he stayed where he was because even brave men respect mud like that. It eats you. It loves you too much. I felt the trench accept me. That's the only word that fits. It welcomed my weight. It wanted me on a level with the water. The surface shifted. It wasn't water anymore, not exactly. It was the idea of water. A mirror that wanted to be walked through. On its face, I saw the sky and the cranes, and just behind my head, the woman with the scarf. In the reflection, she wasn't holding bread anymore. She held a small book, a prayer book maybe, and her lips moved. The boys stared down, hands on the fence like they were getting a mild shock. The knock stopped. In the quiet that followed, a little breath fogged the surface in front of my chin. It was an exhale. It wrote a shape in the fog that looked like a circle, then a line, a crude eye with a pupil. The eye blinked. The circle swallowed the line, and for a second the whole world seemed to hold its breath with it. I felt a pressure on my wrist. Small fingers, cooler than the mud, but not by much. They wrapped me with a polite determination, the way a kid might tug an adult to show them something. The fingers squeezed, not hard, but like they were gauging my reality. I should have screamed. Instead, I said, "Hey," in this stupid, soft voice I didn't know I had. The fingers loosened. The pressure slid away. My hand came up empty and slick with silt. But before I could crawl, before anyone threw me a line, I saw her. Not in the trench. Not in the water. On the far side, at the lip, standing beside the excavator track. She was smaller than I'd thought, maybe 8 or 9. The dress was gray and plain, the fabric dull like it had never known a washing machine. Her hair was center-parted and pulled back with a ribbon that might have been blue when blue meant something else. Her face was neither sad nor happy. It was curious. She looked at me. Then she looked at the pump with interest. She leaned to it like it was a dog you don't want to startle, and placed her hand on the hose. The pump coughed and stuttered and then smoothed out. The water lowered a little. It was like she was petting it. "Miss," I said, because my grandmother raised me right, and when you're in the past's house, you don't act like you own it. "Do you need... Can we help you?" She turned her head like a bird hearing a faraway sound. Over the fence, a Q-47 bus sighed to a stop. The boys straightened as if they'd felt a cold draft. The woman with the scarf spoke louder. The language wasn't English. The girl lifted her hand from the hose. On her palm was a smear of rust like a stigmata. She looked at it with mild surprise, the way you look at blood from a paper cut. Then she did something that will sit with me as long as my body agrees to house me. She wiped her palm across her eyes, one and then the other, like a kid tired of swimming who wants to see. When she lowered her hand, her eyes were dry and the rust was gone. A tiny line of clean water ran from the corner of her right eye, tracing a path down her cheek to her jaw. She raised her chin like a queen receiving a verdict and stepped back, not away, back, the way you do when you remember where you were supposed to be. She blinked once. The pump hiccuped. The trench exhaled. And then she wasn't there. I don't mean she vanished in a puff. I mean she was simply not occupying that part of the world anymore. The way an idea leaves the room when someone laughs too loudly. 1 second there was a girl. The next there was sunlight and the side of the excavator and a faint outline where her dress's hem had brushed dust. Reggie got me up with a ladder. Thomas swore he'd seen a kid and then said he didn't. The woman with the scarf had tears on her face and smiled at me like a mother smiles at a child who brought a broken bird to her. The boys asked if there would still be a building. I told them yes because I didn't know how to tell them no. We poured the footings the next day. The pump kept up. The water tasted like iron if it splashed your lips. We rebarred, formed, poured again. Saunders called and said they were closing their case as artifact removed by unknown parties, which is grown-up code for let's not. At night, I hear the tapping sometimes. Not always. Not every night. It's worse when it rains, which I guess is normal. Pipes talk. Houses settle. But this isn't that. The rhythm has a person inside it. 3, pause 3. Knock, knock, knock. Like she's reminding the earth of a habit it had. Like someone who taps their pockets before they leave a room to make sure they forgot nothing important. I moved things around in my apartment without meaning to. The towels live in a different cupboard now. The glasses are on the second shelf. My fridge hums in patterns that harmonize with my radiator. And for a second in the song they make together, there is a note that sounds like a child's voice just before sleep calls them. Somewhere only they can go. I see her, sometimes when I'm walking to the deli in the morning, in the distorted chrome of a parked SUV. Not the whole of her. A slice, the ribbon in her hair. The corner of her eye. I look up and there's no one. You learn to keep moving. Queens is good for that. It's full of people always already on their way somewhere else. The building will get finished. Maybe a nail salon and a tax prep place in the bottom and 2 floors of condos above with balconies no one uses. People will move in. They'll complain about airplane noise and ask if the neighborhood is up and coming or if it has already arrived. Their kids will scooter past the spot where the trench sinks a half-inch lower than it should every spring. None of them will know that their building has a heartbeat not in the boiler room, but under the slab, where water remembers a girl who looked at new machines and didn't blink. I haven't told you her name because I never knew it. Maybe that's for the best. Names make you think you know things. I know this instead. The past never leaves, it waits. And sometimes it doesn't even wait angry. Sometimes it waits the way a child does by a window, with patience that could outlast a neighborhood, a century, a city's idea of itself. Sometimes that patience is worse because it means you will tether yourself to it forever. If you're reading this and you work the way I do, with your hands in dirt you didn't put there, remember to listen. When the ground taps back, it's not necessarily a warning. It might be a courtesy. It might be the past refusing to be a problem file closed and shelved. It might be the iron coffin child telling you she is still here, and that the polite thing, the necessary thing, is to look her in the eye and acknowledge the wet at the edge of the world we think is sealed. Last week, they laid the first course of brick for the firewall. The mason, a quiet guy from Corona, squared his corners, checked his line, and put down his trowel. "Feels good," he said. "Plum." I nodded because it did. At lunch, I sat on an upside-down bucket and ate a sandwich that had sweated in its plastic. The woman with the scarf walked by with her boys. She didn't stop. She pressed her palm to the fence as she went. I pressed mine from my side. For a second, through old chain link and city air and whatever stands between people, I felt the cool of clean water. Not wet, the cool that water remembers. When I went home that night, I put my ear to my floor. There was nothing for a long time but what you expect. Neighbors' chairs, a dog flexing its paws in a dream. Then very softly, 3 knocks and a pause and 3 more. I whispered, "Okay," because I think that's what she wants. Not rescue, not release, just a witness. Just someone who will tell you that the city stands on 1,000 small rooms that were never meant to be opened, and that sometimes, when one of them opens for a second, it lets out a breath and we all have to learn to live with the change in the weather. If you're ever near Astoria Boulevard and you pass a new building that used to be a nothing lot, and there's a thin seam in the sidewalk where a different shade of concrete meets the rest just so, and you hear something you can't name, don't be scared. Or do. It's better to be a little scared than not. Either way, don't tap on glass. Not even once. Some patience deserves to be honored, and some windows aren't for looking through. They're for letting a child rest her eyes. My name is Caleb Merritt, and I'm from Temple, Texas. I never thought I'd move far from the highway heat and low cicada buzz of home. But for grad school, I ended up in Iowa City, where the trees lean over like friendly neighbors and the air smells like cut grass and rain. It's a quiet college town, the kind that looks like a postcard. Brick buildings, coffee shops with chalkboard menus, and if you walk 15 minutes off the main drag, a cemetery that looks like a park someone forgot to lock at night. People here call it Oakland. The first week I arrived, an older guy at the used bookstore told me, "You should go see the angel before winter. Leaves frame her like a cathedral." He said it like she was a person you could visit and maybe borrow a book from. When he said the angel, I thought he meant some local singer or a librarian. I didn't know he meant a statue almost as tall as the oak limbs that hang over it. A bronze figure with wings lifted and head bowed, like the moment right after a prayer. By September, I'd fallen into an easy rhythm, teaching intro comp to undergrads in the mornings, running along the river after class, and then late nights at my friend Maya's place where a rotating crew of us would drink cheap beer and grade papers. Maya was a lifer in Iowa City, born and raised. Her family ran the little grocery on Rochester. She had this way of telling stories that felt like a campfire with everyone leaning in close. Her roommate Owen was newer like me, a transfer who'd left a big program out east. He had that restless energy of someone who lived out of boxes even after he'd unpacked. Maya was the one who brought up the angel in a way that stuck. It was a Saturday night in early October, one of those evenings where the sky turns violet and you can hear the marching band practicing somewhere. Owen was trying to convince us to go to a bar and watch the game. Maya looked at me and said, "Have you met her yet?" I must have looked confused because she smiled. "The Black Angel." She dragged us both to Oakland in the last blue of daylight. We walked past stones shaded with moss, past names that sounded like hymns until we reached her. I've seen pictures online since, but nothing quite matches standing there. The statue is massive, Wings pitched so wide you feel like you should whisper. She's not the sweet guardian angel you see on Christmas cards. There's weight to her, like she knows something bad about you and also knows you'll figure it out soon enough. People say she used to be bright bronze, almost gold, and then one morning she was black. No weathering, no gradual fade, just black like the sun went out. Maya tapped the base with her sneaker. "The legend shifts," she said. "Some say it turned after the sculptor died. Some say it turned when it was placed here to judge the whole town. Either way, kids play chicken with her. You touch the angel, you die in 7 years." Owen snorted. "That's just a timer for regret. You touch a dirty statue and 7 years later, boom, the vengeful tumbling rocks of coincidence." He said it like he was telling us about a prank he'd outgrown. Maya swatted him with a bundled scarf. "My uncle touched it in high school," she said. "He told me he felt a cold run up his arm like he'd stuck it in a freezer. 7 years and 1 week later, he died of what we still call a freak heart thing. 34, ran marathons. Doc said it was a fluke. We all stood there, not quite looking at each other. I wanted to say I didn't believe in curses. I grew up in a church where the pastor used sports analogies and tried to make hell sound like a minor inconvenience if we practiced enough humility. I wanted to say the statue looked like something a grieving family would buy because it was beautiful, and beauty often scares people who don't know what to do with it. But the truth is, I didn't say any of that. I reached out. "Don't," Maya said, softer than a warning, closer to a plea. I stopped. My hand hovered where a wrist would be. Bare bronze darkened to something like soot. I hadn't planned to touch it. I was just curious how the metal would feel in the cold. Owen tested me with a smile. "How's your pride level today, Texas?" "I'm good," I said. "I've got a solid 7 years left in me." Maya's breath fogged, and that was the first time I noticed the angel's face was streaked, as if rain had drawn back tears that weren't hers. We walked home without touching anything, and I tried not to keep looking back. That night, I dreamed the angel stood in my apartment's tiny kitchen where the countertop sags. She was bigger inside somehow, or the room was smaller. She didn't move, just stood there bowed, wings almost touching the popcorn ceiling, dripping something that sounded like clock ticks. When I woke, the kitchen light was on. I got up to turn it off and found a thin line of black dust on the counter, like someone had dragged a charcoal finger from the stove to the sink. I didn't tell anyone about the dream. I told myself it was simply city dust or ash from the candle I'd burned down to the wick. But the next odd thing was the crosswalk. 3 days later, after class, I caught the flashing white walker and headed across Clinton. A man in a green jacket stood on the opposite curb. He put his hand out like he was asking someone beside him to wait. But there was no one there. When I got halfway across, the walk light died mid-blink. The cars didn't move, but a sound rose, thin and metallic. Not quite a siren, not a phone. It took me a second to realize what it was. A small bell like the kind they ring at funerals back home, deep after the final prayer. I turned around to see where it was coming from. No one else seemed to hear it. The guy in the green jacket did. He looked at me like something had almost hit me. Then the light returned. In workshop that week, I had my students write about belief. Not religious belief, that gets messy fast, but small superstitions. Lucky socks, coin flips, don't step on the foul line. Half the room wrote about the angel without naming her. That's how I discovered she's not just an attraction and not really a joke. She's a pressure point under the town's skin. The day after that, my student Tara brought me a Polaroid she'd taken at the cemetery for a class assignment. When she handed it over, she frowned. It came out weird, like doubled. My professor said the film's expired, but I just bought it. The picture showed the angel head on, but the wings were wrong. One wing lifted high as in the statue. The other wing folded down like she was making a shelter for something small beneath. Behind the lowered wing, a smear like a person just out of frame. Owen keeps his skepticism like a spare tire. He trusts it to get him home. He didn't change his tune even after he started sleeping with the overhead light on. He said it was because his window faced the street lamp and he wanted consistency. Maya and I didn't press. You learn to be gentle with your friends' nervous systems, but I could tell it wore on him. He drank coffee at midnight, paced, talked about transferring again. I teased him about it and saw his jaw go rigid. Around then, students started leaving little offerings at the angel's feet. I noticed them on a morning run. Buttons, folded notes, a rosary hooked over the base, a tiny plastic saint tucked in the seam where her robe meets the pedestal. Some were obvious jokes like a can of beer or a rubber chicken, but underneath those were things with weight. Hair ties, funeral program cards, hospital bracelets. The air felt like the quiet inside a church when you walk in and someone's already praying. That weekend, Maya brought us to an older part of the cemetery where the stones are weather-softened and leaned. She told us a story I'd never heard, and I can't tell you how much was fact. She said the angel had been a gift from a woman who lost her child or her husband or both. It changes depending who's speaking. The woman wanted a monument that would speak, not with words, with presence. She chose wings and a face that didn't comfort. People in town admired the statue when it arrived, until the morning after it was placed when it was black. Some chalked it up to a chemical reaction. Others said it was judgment. The same week, a storm ripped pointing crosses off their mounts and left them lying flat. That's the part no one prints in the brochure, Maya said. There's a brochure? Owen asked. You know what I mean, she said. I think people want to believe they're safe if they behave. They want to believe the angel is punishing pride, not grief. But pride's a slippery thing. It hides in feeling special for being humble. I thought of the kitchen dust. My dreams had stayed almost every night now, a mix of the angel and my mom's church and temple. The pews, the way everyone turned toward the aisle for a bride, a casket, or both. I remembered my dad standing with me by my grandmother's grave, his hand heavy on my shoulder, telling me it's not the dead you worry about. It's how the living talk to them without moving their lips. The first time we went at night was Owen's idea. I told him it was dumb to get arrested for trespassing. He said lots of people go after dark, kids lighting lighters, couples making out on the bench, professors pretending they aren't spooked. We aimed for midnight on a Tuesday, figuring the cops had better things to do than harass grad students with tote bags. The temperature had dropped and the sound the leaves made was different, more like voices rubbing together than applause. As we came up on the angel, we saw 3 other shapes already there. A girl in a denim jacket with a streak of blue in her hair, a guy with a camera on a tripod, and someone older, maybe a groundskeeper off duty. He stood with his hands in his pockets. The guy with the camera had set up dead center and was telling the girl a story in a stage voice. Touch her and you'll drop in 7. That's why you gotta do it drunk and forget. Memory's the real curse, the older guy said. I wouldn't. He didn't shout. He said it like he was tired of picking up after people. The girl laughed and put her palm against the angel's calf. There, she said. Start my clock. The camera guy snapped 3 photos and then lifted the camera to his eye like the tripod was too steady for a moment that should have wobbled. The girl dropped her hand. Cold, she said, but not freezer cold. Cold like a teacher looking at you. Owen slid a look at me. He was waiting to see if I would call it out as theater. Instead, I watched the old man. He was staring at the ground near the base like he was trying to decide whether to say a prayer or call the police. The blue-haired girl asked him, "Do you really believe it?" He said, "I believe in what people make real by repeating." He looked at us, at Maya, then back at the statue. "I believe it's not the touching. It's the bargain you think you're striking when you do. You say, 'Test me, measure me. I'll pass.' And maybe, just maybe, you get what you asked for." We left when a pair of headlights swung through the trees. Back in Maya's kitchen, we sat in the dark, her little string lights the only glow. No one talked for a while. Then Owen said, "I touched it." He said it matter-of-fact, like he was telling us he'd bought the cheaper toilet paper. "In September, that first night, when you turned to look back, Caleb, I did it. Just a quick tap on the foot. I didn't want to make a thing out of it." He smiled like it was still funny, only now it trembled. "I didn't want you to have leverage. Why?" Maya asked. Not accusing, just wanting the real answer. I felt like I was watching everyone else have a belief. I didn't want to feel left out of the fear. He rubbed his forearm, then looked at his palm, which was perfectly normal. 7 years, he said. Maybe we won't be friends then anyway. We all made some version of the same joke. That 7 years is so far away it may as well be imaginary. That the world keeps getting remade and we're the first thing to let go. We drank more. Owen finally fell asleep on the couch, arms folded like a kid pretending to be his own blanket. That's when the notes started showing up on my door. The first was simple. A photocopy of an obituary from 1991. A woman in her 30s. Unexpected. No connection to me, no explanation. The second was a picture of the angel from a distance, like the person taking it had started to go closer and thought better of it. The third was a sheet of lined paper in neat cursive. 7 years marks a lesson, not a sentence. Pride is asking to be spared the laws that spare no one. Beneath it, a verse reference, Micah 6:8. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Someone had underlined walk humbly so hard it dented the paper. I figured it was a campus prank. I stuck the notes in a drawer with menus and coupons. I didn't tell Maya or Owen because they were already uneasy. If I'm honest, I didn't want to feed the careless part of me that liked the attention. It's not something I'm proud of. If the angel punishes anything, maybe it's that. In early November, we had one of those sudden warm days that make you think winter changed its mind. Students sprawled on the grass and took off their shoes. The river looked like a long blade. I went for a run and ended up looping through Oakland. I wasn't trying to be brave. It was just quiet there, and my head felt like a room with too many appliances buzzing. At the Angel, I slowed. Someone had left a loaf of bread. A note next to it said, "For the birds." Only there weren't any birds. The ground was empty, except for an outline and seed where birds should have been. I stood there with my hands on my knees, listening. Somewhere far off, a siren started, wavered, cut out. The sky went clouded quick, like a shade drawn too fast. I didn't touch her. I repeated that to myself like I was making a statement in court. I didn't touch her, I left. But when I got home, my doormat was dusted with a black powder fine as flour. My first thought was prank. My second was mold. My third was ash. I grabbed a broom and swept it into a dustpan and only later realized there was nothing around that could have produced it. The last thing before it all snapped tight was the chair trick in my classroom. I keep the chairs in a big circle on workshop days so everyone feels stuck equally with their own opinions. I left for 10 minutes to print an assignment. When I came back, the chairs had been stacked. Too high all the way around, perfectly balanced. The kind of setup you'd expect in a stage play about ghosts. I laughed at first. Then I checked the hall cameras. The tech guy looked at me and said, they were out from 12:01 to 12:13, the exact window I'd been gone. By then, we started counting things. It's what humans do when they can't fix a problem. Owen counted the days since September. He said 7 years is too big. Let's make it 7 months, then 7 weeks, then 7 days. He checked his pulse in the morning, like he expected to feel it stop. Maya counted people we knew who joked about the angel and later had bad luck, which is an activity I don't recommend if you want to sleep. I counted the notes on my door, 5 by then, and the number of times I thought about touching her. We chose a date to go back. It wasn't dramatic on purpose. It was the last warm night before the forecast, and we did check the forecast, said sleet and the kind of wind that makes your eyes water. We said we'd bring something honest. Not a joke, not a dare, something that cost us a piece of ourselves. We met at 9 with thermoses and scarves. The cemetery was empty. We sat on that bench like parishioners too late for mass but unwilling to go home. I took out a folded sheet, the acceptance letter I'd gloated over when I got into the program here, the one I'd held up like a mirror to tell myself I mattered. I read parts of it out loud and realized how many other letters I hadn't responded to out of pride. I put it at her feet. Maya brought a picture of her uncle, folded down the middle from being carried in too many wallets. She said his name softly and told him she learned how to change a tire because of him. Owen brought a coin he'd had in his pocket since high school, a lucky silver dollar he rubbed before tests, job interviews, first dates. He looked embarrassed when he let it go. I want to stop trying to buy outcomes, he said, and if there's a prayer older than that, I don't know it. We didn't ask for anything. We just sat there. The clouds moved quick. You could see them in the space between her wings. Somewhere a dog barked and then stopped. When the wind changed, I smelled rain and something else, like a struck match that never flared. Then Owen stood. He didn't say, I'm going to do it, or watch me, or hold my beer. He just stood up and walked the 3 steps to the pedestal and reached out. He paused, hand hovering the way mine had weeks back. He looked at us, and it wasn't bravado. It was a question. Do you believe what you say you believe? I found myself nodding without deciding to. Not telling him yes, just acknowledging his question was real. He placed his palm against the angel. He breathed in fast. His shoulders went up. He took his hand back like he'd been stung. Cold, he said. He rubbed his palm on his jeans. God, that's cold. He tried to laugh and it caught. 7 years, he said. Start the count. The lights of a cruiser slid over the hill like slow lightning. We all turned as it idled up and stopped. The officer sat for a minute like he was flipping a coin in his mind. Then he rolled down the window and called, "Park's closed. Don't make me write it up." "We're leaving," Maya called back. It sounded like we were kids rehearsing good behavior. We collected our thermoses and the bench groaned like a thing relieved of weight. As we passed the cruiser, the officer looked at us carefully. "You didn't take anything," he said. "Right?" "No," I said. "We left things." He nodded once and rubbed his wrist with his thumb the way older folks do when something aches. 3 days later, I found the coin back in my mailbox, wrapped in a page torn from a church bulletin. No note, no signature. The headline read, "Pride Before the Fall." Beneath it, clipped verses about humility and judgment. I brought it to Owen, thinking maybe some busybody guardian of the cemetery had returned it like we'd littered. Owen stared at the coin and didn't touch it. "I didn't put a return address on that offering," he said. "How did they know it was mine?" He didn't ask me the other half, the half that launched like a bird and didn't land. "How did they know where you live?" We went to the cemetery again, midday, wanting answers that were human. The ground where we'd laid our things was cleared. Not tidied, cleared. The feral imprint from the rosary was still faintly there. Our acceptance letter, the photo, the coin, all gone. The bread, which should have been consumed by birds, was whole but darkened, like it had been painted black and left to harden. We tried to put it away after that. Finals came. Snow. The bars put up Christmas lights and the whole town smelled like cinnamon. Still, the notes kept appearing. Different handwriting now. Instructions. Warnings. Say you're sorry to the ones you hurt when you wanted to feel special. Write their names on paper and burn it, then scatter the ash. Don't pray to be spared. Pray to be made truthful. On the longest night of the year, Owen collapsed in the lecture hall. Not for dramatic reasons, just because his body decided it was time to lay him down. He stood up to give a presentation and his knees went like someone had tripped him. He blacked out for 40 seconds and woke to Tara fanning him with her notebook. He told the EMTs it was dehydration. They told him to drink Gatorade and sleep. No one said the word curse. But I did. In my head, I did, and felt something in me agree. Here's the part I don't know how to present neatly, like a paper with topic sentences and evidence. In late January, I was walking home past the cemetery fence when I saw the blue-haired girl again, the one who touched the angel in front of the camera. She was on the far path talking to the older man with his hands in his pockets. They stood close like family. The wind was cruel. I almost kept walking, but she lifted her arm and waved. "Hey, Black Dust guy," she called. I didn't remember telling her that story. She looked at me, smiled, then looked back at the man. When I blinked, she wasn't there. Not just around the bend, gone. Like a jump cut. The older man turned and met my eyes across the line of stones. He shook his head once. "Don't," I went home and found another note. My name on the outside this time. Inside, a photocopied photograph of the angel, but the ink was so dark she looked like a silhouette. In the margin, in tiny, patient writing, "It's not the statue. It's the agreement. You get used to living with a countdown you don't acknowledge. You start measuring not in years, but in moments you're present enough to not waste. You call people you meant to call. You answer jokes with something kinder than sarcasm. I wish I'd learned that without the angel. I didn't. That's my fault, not hers." Last week, on a night warm enough to open the window, Owen came over to make dinner. We put on a basketball game and chopped onions with the comfort of people who've survived the same weird year. He reached for the salt and knocked the knife off the counter. It fell. Clang, didn't cut him. We both laughed at how jumpy we were. Then we stopped laughing because in the silence after the clang we heard a bell. On ring, not from the TV, not from a phone. A bell like the kind we heard under the crosswalk light, thin and metallic and annual. He looked at me. "How many days since September?" he asked. I said, "Let's not." He nodded like that was fair. Later, he fell asleep on my couch. I walked into the kitchen and saw a thin line of black on the countertop. Stove to sink, same as the first week I dreamed of her. I wiped it with my thumb and it rubbed into my skin. I washed my hands. The line remained, faint as a scar. I'm writing this because the legend doesn't say anything about confession. It doesn't say whether telling the truth resets the count or makes it worse. It only says pride gets punished, and the fear of that punishment dresses itself as bravery, and we confuse the costume for the person wearing it. There are other details I haven't included because they sound invented. The way the temperature drops when you stand in her shadow even at noon. How the birds refuse the bread and the dogs refuse the path. The way the angel's face has changed for me. Less judgment, more sorrow that judgment is even necessary. I don't need you to believe any of it. I'm writing this for the girl in the denim jacket who probably moved away by now, and for Tara with her expired film, and for the older man who told us the truth we wanted to be a joke. I'm writing it for Maya, who still visits and leaves her uncle's name written on a strip of paper that dissolves in the first thaw. I'm writing it for Owen and the 7 years he jokes about like they are a bet against time. Tonight I walked to Oakland alone. There was a pale disk of moon, the kind that gives you shadows and takes away depth. I felt stupid and young for being there. I felt older than I am. I didn't go to the angel first. I walked the outer path where the names get less familiar. I thought of how many stories end here with no statue to mark them. I thought about the pastor back home telling us that sometimes grace looks like getting what we need instead of what we ask for. When I finally stood in front of her, she was the same. Dark, bowed, heavy with whatever she's been asked to carry for 100 years. I didn't bring an offering this time. I didn't bring a dare. I brought a list of the names I should have apologized to earlier and said them under my breath. I told the truth in the quiet way, which is to say I said it without asking for an answer. I didn't touch her. I don't know if I ever will. If the legend is a test, I don't want to fail it by thinking I can pass it. If it's a mirror, I don't want to mistake my reflection for the world. On my way out at the gate, I passed a woman I'd never seen before. She wore a black coat, hair pinned back, face as tired as any face at the end of a long day. She stopped and looked at me like you do when you recognize someone from a dream. "You're the one who didn't touch her," she said. Not a question, I said. "Not yet," she nodded. "That counts." "At what?" I asked. She smiled without showing teeth. "At what it counts at." She went in. I stood there listening to the bell that wasn't there, counting out a single note that lasted a little too long. I went home by the river. The lights on the water made stepping stones. I thought of 7 years as a leash that could either pull or lead, depending if you fight it. I thought of pride as the place in me that wants a scoreboard more than mercy. I thought of divine retribution not as lightning from above, but as gravity, the consequence that brings everything back to ground eventually. I didn't feel safe. I felt seen. There's a difference. If you come to Iowa City, you'll probably hear about the Black Angel. If you're like us, you'll go at night because that's when you can't pretend as well. Bring a real offering. Bring the version of yourself that says, "I'm sorry," without trying to convince anyone you've changed. Don't bargain. Don't dare. And if you reach out, and you'll want to because we touch what we want to own, feel for the cold that isn't weather. It's a kind of attention. I don't know when the 7 years start. I don't know if they already did for me when I almost touched pride and called it courage. All I know is I keep waking up to a kitchen counter with a faint dark line that no scrubbing fixes, and a friend who sleeps better on my couch than he does in his bed, and a town where the dead rest under rolling green hills watched over by a tarnished angel who went black overnight and never turned back. Maybe the punishment isn't death. Maybe it's the fear that we waste the time we're given turning coins in our pockets and counting days on calendars. Maybe the punishment is being known exactly and still walking past the bench and the bread and the names into the fog toward the gate, where you hold your hand a few inches from metal and decide again whether to touch what you can't keep. If you touch her, tell the truth afterwards. If you don't, tell the truth anyway. I don't have an ending for this. I have an appointment on my calendar 7 years from the night I almost made a promise I couldn't keep. It just says, "Walk humbly." The bell hasn't rung again. The year stretches in front of us like fresh snow, full of prints we haven't made yet. Somewhere a siren starts and flickers out. Somewhere a girl with blue in her hair takes a photo that smears. Somewhere, the angel bows her head and listens to people who think they're talking to themselves. I'm leaving this here like a note at her feet, folded until it can stand up on its own. If it finds you, and you're the kind of person who reaches out just to feel the cold, that's between you and whatever keeps the count. I hope you're spared, not from consequence, from pride. That would be mercy. That would be the kind of miracle we don't notice because it looks too much like an ordinary day where you make it home. Sit at the kitchen table, and the only sound is something like a clock ticking and the softest echo of wings you'll never see move. My name is Caleb Walker, and I'm from Denton, Texas. Last summer, I drove east with my girlfriend, Erin, and my best friend, Marcus, because Erin had wanted to see Savannah before it sells its soul, which is a thing she says about anywhere with good food and old buildings. We hit I-20, crossed into Georgia, and by the time we rolled into town, it was dusk, hot as an attic, the streetlights showing floating dots of bugs like snow you could hear. Savannah looked like a movie set somebody forgot to take down. Brick squares, iron balconies, magnolias, and those gray curtains of Spanish moss that make you keep glancing up to make sure nothing's hiding there. We got a cheap rental off Oglethorpe Avenue with a key-coded safe by the door. The place smelled faintly like bleach and old rain. That first night, we walked the squares and watched a ghost tour pass us. 30 people wearing glowing lanyards and clutching plastic cups, following a guy in a tricorn hat. I laughed. Marcus rolled his eyes. Erin said, "We're doing one tomorrow." I didn't fight it. I figured we'd hit a few bars, tack on one spooky story, sleep hard, and spend the rest of the trip eating shrimp and talking about how cute everything was. I didn't expect Savannah to feel crowded, not with tourists, with attention. Like there were more eyes on us than the people in front of us. The air had weight. The next afternoon, we met the tour under a big live oak. The guide's name was Tess, no tricorn hat. She wore a black t-shirt and hiking boots and spoke like a history teacher who taught the class you heard through the wall while you failed algebra. She got right to it. Fires, fevers, yellow jack, wars, duels, bodies buried fast and shallow, graves moved and not moved. Erin squeezed my hand when we passed a small brass plaque on the sidewalk that said, "In so many words, you were probably walking over human remains." Finally, we reached Colonial Park Cemetery. Tess stopped us at the gate and let us take pictures. The cemetery is walled in brick and iron, with cracked vaults and headstones that look like they're sinking slowly into warm bread. Spanish moss hung in long strips that didn't stir even when a breeze hit us. The sound of insects never stopped. "If you remember one thing," Tess said, "remember this place was closed before the Civil War. There are no new burials here. What you see is what you get. And what you don't see," she smiled. "Well, you'll hear plenty of theories if you stick around." We stuck around. We followed the gravel paths between rows of headstones. Tess told us about cholera, about a duel with a misfired pistol, about a grave that had been used as a table during the war. She stopped in front of a sealed brick vault, low and wide, with a stone face that bulged a little in the center like a pressure point. It had no name, no dates, just a rectangle of darker brick where a door might have been mortared shut. "This," she said, "is the thing Savannah people don't put on t-shirts." Everyone leaned in like it would speak if we got closer. Depending on who you ask, it's a family vault or a plague vault, a careless rebuild after a hurricane, or a sick joke from the 1800s. The truth is, nobody likes to say out loud, "It's called the tomb that screams." Someone laughed, then coughed to cover it. Tess didn't smile. Back in the 1970s, kids would dare each other to come in at night and press their ears to the mortar. Don't ever do that. You'll get bit by something, and sometimes they swore you could hear voices. More than voices, screams, at least that's the story. Plenty of people will tell you it's the wind through a crack. Others will say it's a hoax. Older folks will say if you hear it, it's not for you. Erin shivered. Marcus checked his phone like he was signaling to me that he was firmly not buying it. I didn't buy it either. Not then. It was broad daylight. That night, though, after dinner at a place with wood beams and bottled beer and a waiter who said y'all like a line through a song, Erin said she wanted to walk again. We'd had 2 drinks. I didn't think much of it. Savannah at night is all warm light and long shadows. You can see your breath out of habit even if the air feels like a bathroom after a shower. We passed a couple arguing softly in a square, and an old man playing a trumpet by himself. The streets were quiet in that way that makes you whisper. When we reached the wall of Colonial Park, Erin slowed. "Let's go in." "It's closed," I said. The gate on the side wasn't locked. We pushed it open and slipped through. Inside, the cemetery looked different. The insects sounded louder and the walls kept their noise in. The trees leaned. The stones were darker shapes against a gray ground. I don't scare easily. I scared easily then. "Let's just walk through," Erin said. She had her phone out, but the flashlight wasn't on. It felt wrong to light things. Marcus stuck close to me. He kept saying, "Man," under his breath like a prayer and a complaint. We found the vault because Erin knew exactly where she was going. The tomb that screams looked smaller at night, like it had hunkered down. The darker rectangle of mortar in the center did look like a seam. Erin touched it lightly. Her hand came away with a white powder. "Mortar," she said, like she was identifying feathers. "Don't do that," I said. I don't know why I sounded so serious. I felt watched. The air smelled like stone and something a little sweet, like flowers turned over in dirt. Erin leaned and put her ear close to the seam. Marcus shot me a look. I shook my head. "Erin," I said. "No," she mouthed. "It's fine, it was." Until it wasn't. The sound that came through the stone was small at first, like something you convince yourself you didn't hear. Then it was a breath, then a whisper, then a voice, and then there's no other way to say it. It was a scream. Not a wind noise, not a cat. Not a prank from behind the wall. A human scream, raw at the edges, like somebody spilling boiling water out of their mouth. Erin jerked back so fast she hit Marcus. He stumbled into me. All three of us froze. The scream didn't stop. It wavered. It rose and dropped, and somewhere inside it I heard words. The words weren't in English. Or maybe they were, and I was too scared to understand. Under it was another voice, lower, and I swear there was something else, like a scratching. Erin grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "You heard it," she said, like she wasn't asking. "Let's go," Marcus said. His face was the color of paper. We went. Fast. At the gate we ran, and when we hit the street we didn't stop. We didn't say anything until we were back in the rental. All lights on. The television volume too loud to be polite at midnight. Erin laughed in the way people laugh after a near-miss car crash. "Sharp and too bright. That was a trick," she said, and the way she said it made it clear she needed it to be one. "I don't know how," I said. My voice sounded like I'd eaten dust. "But yeah, okay." Marcus wiped his face with both hands. He didn't say anything. We made a pact not to tell Tess, not to tell the internet, not to make it a thing. I lay awake for hours anyway, watching the ceiling fan and seeing a dark seam in brick every time I closed my eyes. The next morning, sunlight made it absurd. We did normal things: coffee, a bookstore, a boat tour where an old veteran told us jokes about dolphins. By late afternoon, I was okay enough to think about it like a story I'd heard, not a thing that had happened to me. Then we cut down a side street and almost walked right into the man with the rake. He was in city green work pants. His hair was white and close-cropped. His skin looked like he'd spent years in the sun. He had kind eyes and a jaw that could have split wood. "Afternoon," he said. "I seen you three last night." I felt my stomach drop. Erin tried to make her voice casual. "We just walked through. A lot of people do," he said. "Gate's supposed to be locked. Sometimes it ain't." He rested the rake and looked at each of us in turn. "You pressed your ear to the brick, didn't you?" We didn't answer. He nodded like we had. "Name's Roland, grounds." He jerked his chin toward the cemetery. "You tourists don't hear what the old folks hear in this city because y'all don't expect to." "That's good. It's safer. Sometimes your expectations don't matter." "What is it?" Marcus asked. It came out quicker than he meant. Roland's mouth twitched. "People say a lot. Old plague vault. Folks bricked up when fever came. Family vault with a feud and a revenge. Slave catcher's pen. You know what I think? I think it's like a bottle in the ocean. Every now and then it washes up and some fool pulls the cork and there's a smell in the air. And then it's gone. It ain't always the same thing inside. You've heard it?" I asked. "Twice," he said. "Once when I was a teenager. Once the year my wife passed." The way he said the word wife made it heavy. You hear it, you don't get curious. Curiosity is teeth. Curiosity takes pieces. "Why is it sealed?" Erin asked. Roland glanced toward the cemetery. "Because people can't help themselves." He shifted his grip on the rake. "I'll tell you this, since you're already on the wrong side of knowing. If you hear it again, don't say I didn't warn you, don't answer." "We didn't," I said. "You don't even answer in your head," he said. "Because it's not you it's calling. But it'll settle for you if you let it." He walked on. It felt like a sentence being passed. We didn't plan to go back. That's the part people always scoff at. The truth is, we didn't. We avoided that stretch of Oglethorpe the way you avoid a hospital room where you got bad news. But that night a storm rolled up out of nowhere. We watched the sky go from pale to bruised in 10 minutes. The streets turned to mirrors. The glass in our little rental shook in the frames. Around midnight, the power quit. The dark felt old. Not modern dark, phone flashlights and exit signs. The kind of dark that makes you remember how small your eyes are. We'd all ended up sleeping in the living room because the bedrooms had big windows and the trees outside clawed them with the tips of their fingers. Lightning made the blinds flash like someone breathing. Erin's phone was on the coffee table. Even at 1%, it lit up when a notification hit it. She reached for it. Her thumb froze before it got there. She looked at me. I didn't need to ask what she was hearing. At first, I thought it was the wind whining through brick. Then it gathered itself into a voice I knew too well already. The scream came thin through the heavy rain. That was the worst part. The storm should have muffled everything. It threaded through the noise like a wire. No, Marcus said. He said it over and over like he could argue with the weather. I got up and went to the door before I knew I'd moved. Erin grabbed my arm. Don't. I shouldn't have. I know that. But it was like a fire alarm in a hotel. You can pretend it's nothing. You still get up and stand in the hall. We stepped under the porch eave and got soaked anyway. The scream came and came. It had a shape now, not words still, but shape. Between bursts of thunder I could hear a low grind, and under that same scratching. It's the cemetery, I said. It's wind, Erin said. But she said it out of duty. Marcus shook his head hard enough to fling water out of his hair. We're not going over there, he said. We're not, I said. I meant it. Then I saw the light. Not lightning. Not a street light glinting off puddles. A moving light, low and steady, bobbing like someone carrying a lantern before them. The light went along the iron fence across the street and then through the gate that should have been locked. Roland, I thought. Maybe he was checking the grounds, making sure a branch hadn't come down. That made sense enough to ruin my good judgment. Stay, I told Erin and Marcus. I didn't say it like I was in charge. I said it because some part of me still believed saying things mattered. I stepped off the porch into water that immediately went over my shoe. I cut across the street because the crosswalk didn't matter at 2 a.m. in a storm. The gate stood half open like a mouth. Inside, the rain under the trees felt colder. The light was partway down the path, steady, not bouncing like a flashlight. It didn't throw a beam. It just made the rain near it a different color. I followed it because I didn't know what else to do. I told myself I was going to help Roland. I told myself a lot. The scream was louder, less like a scream now and more like a call. The light stopped in front of the tomb that screams. I stopped too, a dozen feet back. The shape holding the light wasn't Roland. It was too tall, too thin, and it didn't seem exactly where the light said it was. That's the only way I can explain it. The figure raised its free hand and set it on the seam of the vault. It didn't look like a hand in that light. It looked more like a shadow remembering how to be a hand. Hey, I shouted. My voice sounded small in the storm. The figure didn't turn. The scream changed. It hit a note that felt like it pulled something out of my chest and shook it. Erin's palm smacked my back between my shoulder blades. She'd followed me without shoes. Marcus was right behind her, face set in what I always thought of as his fight face. I have never been so glad to see two people I loved doing the dumbest possible thing. Come on, Erin said. We leave. The figure's head tilted. The light swung. I got this feeling, pure animal, that if whatever was there looked right at us, we wouldn't go home the same. We stepped backward together. The rain made a curtain between us and it. Thunder rolled closer. The light flickered, dipped, then swelled, and in that moment the scream snapped off like a radio. The silence wasn't better. It rushed in and filled every part of me. Erin's grip tightened. The figure lowered its fake hand from the seam. The light went out, we ran. The gate scraped against its post with a noise like a breath sucked between teeth. Back at the rental, we slammed the door and leaned on it like a movie cliché. The power came back at 4 a.m, all the lights bursting on at once like the house had been holding its breath. None of us slept. When the sun rose greasy and hard over the trees, we went to find Roland. I don't know why we thought he'd have a booth or an office. He found us. He was raking gravel back from the path like the storm had sucked it into the grass. He looked tired. When he saw us, he stopped. You went, he said. We saw a light, I said. We thought it might be you. He closed his eyes for a second. Wasn't me, he said. Wasn't anyone I'd want you to meet twice. We heard it again, Erin said. It changed. Roland leveled the rake and leaned on it. Sometimes it gets... He looked for a word and didn't find one. Eager. What is it? Marcus asked again, this time sounding less like he wanted an answer and more like he needed one. Roland gazed past us at the vault. In daylight, it looked like an old pile of brick again. You want another story? I'll give you another story. Long time ago, when they redid this place after the war, they moved bones. They got paid by the wagon. The work was men like me and boys like I was. They patched what they could and sealed what they couldn't. Sometimes they sealed what nobody wanted to open. Makes sense to you? Aaron nodded small. Thing about sealing is, it ain't just the brick. It's the idea. Most of us are walking around with seams inside. Places we don't look. Places nobody should. He tapped the seam of the vault with the end of the rake, gentle. You put enough of those together in one town, it's gonna leak. That night, I said, it had a light. Roland's mouth twitched again. Not a smile. Oh, they'll try different doors. Light gets attention. So does a child. So does your own name. That's why you don't answer. You answer a light, it's in your house. You answer a voice, it's in your head. He straightened. You're leaving, aren't you? We were supposed to stay 2 more nights, Aaron said. We can go early. Roland nodded. No shame in that. He hesitated, then added, Before you go, do me a favor. Humor an old man. We'll put something right that someone left wrong. He led us to the vault. He took a small burlap bag from his pocket and shook out a handful of black sand, scattering it along the seam. He murmur-prayed, not loud enough for me to catch much, but I heard my wife and I heard keep them outside. He pressed his palm flat to the brick like he was checking a child's forehead. Feel that? He asked. I didn't feel anything. Aaron said, It's warm, surprise in her voice. Marcus didn't say a word. He stared at the seam like he expected it to open and show him a mirror. We told ourselves we'd grab lunch, pack slowly, and leave in the morning. We ended up packing everything in an hour. We were at the edge of town by 2, the moss in the trees behind us like printed pages torn into strips. The air got lighter mile by mile. Aaron drove while I watched the mirror like the light might follow us. We didn't talk about it again for months. Life reasserted itself. Work, rent, a broken AC unit in August. Sometimes I woke up at night with the sound of a scream in my head and the taste of wet brick in my mouth. I told myself it was a dream that leaned on a memory. Then, in January, a letter came. It was postmarked Savannah. There was no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, lined, torn out of a notebook. Roland's handwriting uneven. I've thought about why he wrote instead of calling. Maybe he didn't want to say it. Maybe he wanted his words to get there even if his voice couldn't. It said, I told you twice because I wanted you to understand it wasn't a story. I got careless. I stayed late. It called my wife's name, her young name, the one only I used. I didn't answer. I thought about it. That was enough. Don't answer. Even in your head. At the bottom, like an afterthought, a line. If you hear it and you've got no choice, drown it out. 3 weeks later, I searched the Savannah City site to see if Roland still worked grounds. There was a memorial posted by a neighborhood group instead. It said Roland Sims, beloved caretaker, gone home, no date. A photograph of him smiling with a book of names in his hands. No cause. Aaron read it and squeezed my shoulder hard. Marcus sent a single text. Don't go back there, I wouldn't. That's what I've been saying this whole time. I wouldn't. But last night I fell asleep with the television on. Some travel show doing a Christmas special. The host wore a scarf and said y'all too much. They walked through Savannah, lights on the trees, and there it was on the screen for half a second, a flash between B-roll, the brick wall, the iron gate, the low vault like a shoulder under a blanket. I looked at the time. Midnight. Then the sound went weird on the TV, like the volume slid down a hill, and for a moment I heard a thread of a voice I didn't understand, and under it something I did, my young name, the one only my grandmother used, and she's been dead 15 years. I turned the volume up until the speakers buzzed. I said out loud, no, like Roland had said to us, like Marcus had said to the night. I changed the channel. It didn't help. The sound wasn't in the TV. It was in the gaps between things. I walked to the kitchen and ran the faucet and let it thunder into the sink. Aaron woke and came to the doorway and watched me and asked if I was okay with her eyes. I shook my head. The voice went on. It didn't knock. It didn't need to. It found the seam and pressed. I did the only thing I could think of. I turned on every tap. Kitchen, bathroom, tub. I put a pot under each and let them rattle. The apartment filled with the soft roar of water. It pushed the voice back. It didn't erase it. It made it harder to find. The scream thinned and went somewhere else like a radio station you pass. Aaron stood with me till the water ran cold. We don't have the kind of money where you can waste it. I let it run anyway. When I finally turned the taps off, the pipes clanked like something speaking through a cough. The house went quiet. The voice didn't come back that night. I don't have some big lesson. I don't have proof. I've got a warning from a man who raked gravel and minded the dead, and then he didn't anymore. I've got a place in my head where I don't look. I've got a town 3 states away that feels like it's leaning toward me if I stand very still. If you go to Savannah, and you will because the food is good and the trees make you feel like you're in a story about a story, take the tour. Tip the guide. Look at the headstones and be respectful. If the gate is open after dark, close it with your hand on the iron and walk away. If you hear someone screaming and you are sure they're under brick and older than the city, don't answer. Not out loud. Not in your head. Not with the part of you that leans toward help, because that part is kind and dangerous. People will tell you it's the wind. People will tell you it's a hoax or a myth or a recording played under the path by bored kids. I hope they're right for you. I hope you go home believing that. Because there are sealed places in this world and in us. Some things are trapped because they can't get out. Some things are trapped because they like it inside and it keeps them close to your ear. If you doubt me, wait until August. Wait until a storm sits on the city like a hand on a bell. Step outside and listen for the one voice in 100 that knows your name, the way you wish someone would say it again. When it comes, and it will if you listen, let the sinks run. Turn on the shower. Fill the bathtub and the kettle and the coffee maker. Make so much water roar that you could believe the sea itself came to ask about your day. Stand there until your legs shake. Don't answer. And if you forget this for a second because you're human and it is very hard not to answer when something calls you that way, remember Roland, who told us twice and wrote us once. Remember a low vault with no name and a seam you think you could pick with your fingernail if you were a worse person. Remember there are places in Savannah where the air is thick with more than just heat. They have their stories. They tell them. They want you to talk back. The worst part is, I think somebody did once. Maybe more than once. That's why it knows how to ask. That's why the screams sound like they're not only from the inside. Sometimes when I'm between sleeping and awake, I hear them echoing as if the vault were open for a breath, and what's calling isn't begging to be let out. It's announcing that something got in. And if you've ever felt a room become crowded all at once without anyone walking in, you'll know what I mean. I keep the taps in good repair now. I listen for the weather. I don't watch travel shows after 10. I don't say my young name out loud. And when the night leans just a little, when the apartment gets that feeling like a church where someone said the wrong thing, I put my hand against the drywall where a stud runs, and I check for warmth. If it's there, I wake Aaron and we let the water sing. This is me not answering. This is me telling you not to either. If you ever stand under those trees with the moss like gray hands and feel like you're being watched by more than tourists, you probably are. Don't be friendly. Don't be brave. Be quiet, be boring, be gone. The tomb will still be there after you leave, and so will whatever it keeps. The difference is whether it learns how to say your name and whether you teach it how you sound when you answer. My name is Mason Ellison, and I'm from Weatherford, Texas. I never planned to go to Deadwood, South Dakota in late October, but that's where I ended up after my life took a turn I didn't see coming. My fiancée, Lauren, broke off our engagement a month before the wedding. She said we felt uneven, which is a polite way of saying she didn't trust me to keep my promises. I took a week off, threw a duffel in the back of my truck, and just drove. Headlights carving out a tunnel through the dark, radio low, no destination, until the sign started mentioning Deadwood. I'd seen it on TV, the famous Wild West town that now sells t-shirts and reenacts shootouts for the crowd. It sounded like a place stuck between history and make-believe, and that fit my mood. I arrived close to sunset. The street lamps were already on, hung from wooden posts above the boardwalks. The buildings looked like movie sets, false fronts, big windows, chalkboards promising buffalo burgers. There were Halloween decorations in a few of the windows, but the town felt quieter than a theme park. A rain shower had just passed, and everything smelled like wet timber and coal smoke. I parked next to a bar with a swinging sign, secured the truck with a click, and listened to the last cars pass on the main drag. The wind came down the hill in cool breaths. Above the rooftops, the hillside rose into a dark shape of pines and stone. Somewhere up there, the old cemetery stood, clinging to the slope like an audience looking down on the living. I checked into a small hotel that used to be a boarding house. The night manager, Hank, was a thin man with a gray handlebar mustache that would have looked like a costume anywhere else. Here it felt right. "You traveling alone?" he asked, sliding a key across the counter. It was an actual brass key with a wooden fob. The tag said room 7. Yeah. He studied me in that way people in small towns do, trying to guess your story without asking. "You here for the ghost tours? They're running up to Mount Moriah tonight. I'm not really a tour guy. You don't have to be. They'll still find you." He smiled like it was a joke, but he didn't laugh. Room 7 had a window looking across the street at a store that sold vintage-looking banknotes and fake gold nuggets in drawstring pouches. The floor slanted just enough that if you dropped a coin it would roll slowly toward the wall. There was a water stain on the ceiling like a map of the Dakotas, and the bedspread smelled faintly like cold smoke, the way fabric smells when it's been near a fireplace for a long time. I tossed my bag on the chair, washed my face, and told myself I'd have one drink and some dinner and then sleep. The bar down the street had a long mirror behind the counter and a piano nobody was touching. A woman with a kitten tattoo on her wrist served me a whiskey and a burger. Most of the people there were bikers and couples older than me, wearing matching hoodies. I watched the door more than I meant to out of habit. I'd gotten used to expecting Lauren to walk in late, hair damp from the rain, apologizing for something that didn't need an apology. Empty doorways have a way of reminding you what you lost. The bartender noticed and filled my glass without me asking. "That cemetery tour's good," she said, like she'd decided for me. "The guide is a girl named June, knows every story. She's not a bullshitter either. Maybe tomorrow." "You should go tonight," she said. "The fog makes it better." "I don't see any fog." She pointed past me. The window showed the streetlights bleeding into a thin white film that hadn't been there 30 minutes ago. The hillside really did look like it was breathing. I went because I didn't want to stare at the empty door any longer. The tour group met under a brittle-looking sign that read, "Mount Moriah, Historic Cemetery." June was younger than me, maybe 25, bundled in a denim jacket with a fleece collar and a beanie tugged low. She had the kind of voice that carries without shouting. She passed out small flashlights and told us to stay together on the switchback path. The fog was a finger's width off the ground, curling around our shoes. Deadwood was born for quick money and quick burials, June said as we walked. Gold brought people. Disease and bad luck took them. There was a big fire in '79 that burned the town down. Then they rebuilt. Then it burned again. People ran on promises back then. A lot of those promises broke before they even hit the ground. There were tourists from Nebraska and a couple from Florida. An older man in a heavy coat walked alone, his hands clasped behind his back like he was visiting old friends. No one talked much. It felt wrong to make small talk when the hillside was lined with tilted stones and iron fences like ribs. We stopped at the famous graves, Wild Bill, Calamity Jane, where the guide gave us the speech. When we moved on, the path narrowed and the markers got more modest. White marble lambs for kids taken by fever, weathered boards where names were half gone. I caught a flash of something pale between the trees, but when I cut my light that way, it was only a sheet of fog lifting off the ground. "Deadwood has a lot of ghost stories," June said, "but the one people ask me about the most is the Restless Bride. Has anyone heard of her?" A couple of people nodded. I hadn't. June pointed up the slope toward a cluster of stones surrounded by a rusted fence. She wasn't famous, not like the ones on the postcards. The story goes she came here by train, mail-order bride. She came to meet a man who paid for her route, though no one agrees on his name. Some say he was a prospector, some a gambler. Some say he was a good man killed before she arrived. Others say he never existed at all, that the letters came from someone else using his name. She came anyway, because promises matter when you don't have anything else to hold. I felt the group lean closer to that little fence as a unit. There's always one grave people decide is the right one, even if it isn't. The metal was bent as if someone had tried to climb in and then changed their mind. There were fake flowers stuck in the cold ground and a glass jar with a tea candle inside, unlit. "What happened to her?" someone asked. June's light moved slowly across the names. "They say the bride was found in a creek outside town in her dress. No evidence of who did it. Just a rumor that she was seen walking after dark, stopping strangers and asking if they'd seen her husband. She still does that. When the fog's right and the town's quiet, she wanders, asks her question. If you say yes, she says, then keep your promise." If you say no, sometimes she still follows you because she doesn't believe you. If you say nothing at all, she thinks you left her waiting. She said it in the same tone you use when you explain where the gift shop is. Calm and practical. The fog shoelaced between the stones. People laughed nervously the way they always do when a guide earns their tip with a good line. We moved along, the beams of our flashlights crawling ahead like pale worms. The older man walking alone said quietly, just to himself, "Keep your promise," as if he was checking how the words felt in his mouth. I'll admit the hairs went up on my arms at that. It was too close to something I didn't want to think about. Back at the hotel, I couldn't sleep. The room had settled into that deep kind of quiet where the clock sounds like a hammer, and even your own breath feels rude. Sometime after midnight, a soft knock came at the door. 3 small taps, not the hesitant knock of a drunk tourist. It sounded polite. I sat up. Another 3 taps. There's a line between curiosity and stupidity, and I've stepped over it plenty of times, but I still looked through the peephole. I saw nothing. Not the hall. Not the opposite wall. Just a wash of pale blur like the glass was fogged from the other side. A third set of 3 taps came, very slow and even. "Hello?" I said. The blur shifted. A voice came that I can only describe as exhausted. Not whispery, not spooky like a Halloween CD, just tired. "Have you seen my husband?" it asked. Every instinct in me went tight. The rational part of my brain flipped through explanations. Drunk prank, a tour guide trying to scare the tourists, someone needing help. But my mouth had its own idea. "No," I said. "I'm sorry." The fog in the peephole thinned. I could see now the hallway and the opposite door, nobody there. A cold smell pushed under the door then, like the air a walk-in freezer exhale when you open it. The brass key on my nightstand ticked twice, tapping once for each ring it touched on the wooden fob like something had brushed it. I told myself it was settling wood. Then I lay back and listened to the silence and felt the cold in my teeth. Morning made me feel stupid about it. The town looked like a postcard again. I got coffee and watched a small group of kids posing next to a man in chaps who pretended to fall over when a pop gun went off. I should have left that day. Instead, I stayed and went back up the hill alone, avoiding the tour time. The trail held the prints from the night before. The fog was gone, but the shade of the pines felt heavy. Pine needles muffled my steps. I didn't know why I was there until I was standing at that bent iron fence again. The ground inside it was patchy and thin, the dirt a dark color like coffee grounds. There were no dates on the stone, and the name was scrubbed away. The glass jar had been moved, and the candle inside was dented. I took a step closer and felt a give under my right boot, a shift like I'd stepped on the edge of a board. It creaked low in the earth. I backed away fast, heart up in my throat. I don't step on anyone's resting place if I can help it. "Looking for her?" someone said behind me. I turned. The older man from the tour stood a few feet back, hands still clasped behind him. In daylight, he looked dried out, like he'd been staring into a campfire for a long time and forgot to blink. He had a paper bag from the grocery with something long inside. Could have been candles or flowers. "I'm just walking," I said. He nodded once, like that made sense. Everyone who falls out of love ends up here eventually. It's a place that knows what to do with broken promises. I didn't say I felt. I started, then stopped. Maybe I'd said more than I thought last night in the bar. Maybe my face said it now. The old man put the bag down and leaned on the fence. "She doesn't ask like a cop. She asks like a woman whose bones are tired of not getting an answer. When it's foggy, you can smell the creek water in her dress." "What's her name?" I asked. He shook his head. "She had one. The town didn't keep it. That's part of the hurt. We only kept the men's names." He looked at me. "If she asks you again, don't lie. If you say yes, she'll expect you to act like it." I told her no. She might not believe you. He picked up the bag. Never met a ghost that believed what a man said on the first try. That evening, I grabbed dinner at another bar. A pair of guys in cowboy hats played a song that was only 3 chords but still somehow sad. I sat alone, ate slow, and told myself to leave in the morning. By the time I walked back to the hotel, the street was almost empty. The boardwalk thumped under my boots. The hollow sound of wooden steps can sound like someone following you even when nobody is. Except it didn't stop when I stopped. It lagged, then caught up again, then lagged. I felt that prickle at the back of my neck you get when you know someone is paying attention to you with bad intentions. I turned fast. There was no one on the boardwalk, but about 10 feet behind me in the street there was an outline that made no sense. Not a person. An area where the rain-slicked dark of the pavement wasn't as dark, moving in a slow, uncertain way like a person learning to walk again. I can't explain it better than that. My eyes kept trying to give it detail, hair, face. Every time my brain filled something in, the streetlights shifted and I realized I'd invented it. It kept pace with me all the way to the stairs. When I stepped onto the first one, the air cooled like a door had opened in a winter house. I went up fast and got the door open and locked. I was half laughing at myself, that shaky laugh that sounds like you're choking. I put my phone on the nightstand and saw that the photo Lauren used to text me, her standing in a laundromat with a plastic ring on, making a face, was still pinned at the top. I don't know why I tapped it. Habit, pain, self-sabotage. The photo opened. For a half second I saw something behind her that wasn't there before. Veil-like. It could have been a reflection in the glass doors of the dryers, but the part of me that counted knocks and watched empty doorways didn't think so. I didn't sleep long. When I woke up, it was full dark, the kind of dark that feels like it fills your ears. The smell of cold water returned, but stronger. Like a river I couldn't see had forced itself under the door. 3 taps at the wood. I got up and stood with my hand on the knob and thought of what the old man had said. Don't lie. If you say yes, act like it. I opened the door. The hall was empty in that weird way hotels get at night when the carpet is the only thing that feels real under your feet. The lights hummed. The air was colder in the hall than inside my room. I stepped out. The door shut behind me with a soft thud that sounded too much like finality. Have you seen my husband? The voice asked. It didn't come from down the hall. It came from the air in front of me. The words pushed the temperature down another notch. A small drifting of fog rolled across the carpet, even though there's no reason there should be fog in a hotel hallway. I swallowed. No, I said, but I can help you look. The silence after that had a shape to it, like someone listening closely. I felt an ache in my jaw, a reaction to cold. And then something moved. A slight flaring of white near the floor. Not feet, but the impression of movement. It glided past me and the end of a torn ribbon brushed my fingers. It was damp and rough as old lace. Keep your promise, the voice said. I followed because I had said I would. Down the stairs, down the second flight, past the lobby where Hank slept with his forehead balanced on his hand. The front door swung open ahead of me, and the fog outside lapped up to the threshold like it had been waiting. We went out into it. The street was empty. The boardwalk shone like wet bones. The shape, if that's what I can call it, didn't leave footprints in the fog, but the air kept changing, denser where she passed. She moved like someone who had been taught to walk by watching others and was trying to remember the steps. Up the road, left at the corner, toward the hillside where the path begins. I thought stupidly that I should have brought a coat. I also thought somehow that I should have brought a ring. Not to give, there's nothing like that in me. Just to hold. Like a key. Like proof I understood what a promise weighs. We went up the switchbacks without flashlights. The fog was thicker, like river breath that had drifted uphill. I could see the darker lines of the graves and fences against it. At some point I realized I could hear a thin sound, a rustling that wasn't the pines. It took me a while to place it. The soft scrape of a dress hem catching on dry grass. She stopped at the bent fence. The jar with the tea light had been moved again. It sat outside the gate now like someone was trying to lead her away from where she always returns. She stood next to me. I knew she was there because the air to my right smelled like creek stones after a flood. She didn't speak for what felt like a long time. I got the feeling she didn't like being looked at. I kept my eyes on the dirt and the tea light and the bent iron. Finally, she said, I came a long way. He said to come. He said he would be here. I didn't know what you're supposed to say to that. I don't think there is anything. You just stand there with your hands in your pockets feeling like the worst version of your gender. I had not been kind lately. I had not been honest. I thought about Lauren's last words to me, which were painfully simple. If you can't do this now, you won't do it later. What was his name? I asked. She didn't say. Either she didn't remember or the world had eaten it. Names are one of the first things time chews up. I kept all the letters, she said. He said he had a little house with a stovepipe and a chair he made himself. He said there was a valley where the grass bent like hair. He said he knew how to be good. The last line broke a little. I know what it sounds like when someone stops believing in the person they love. You can hear the sound it makes inside their chest. He wasn't there, she went on. I asked and asked. They said to wait. They said he was delayed. Men get delayed. Men get waylaid. Men forget. The fog shifted and thinned, and I saw for the first time something like a face. It was only overlaid, no more substantial than breath on a mirror. The impression of a cheek and a jawline and the shadow of an eye. Not pretty or ugly, just unfinished. "Keep your promise," she said again, softer this time, like to herself. And then, "Please." Something got loose inside me then. Not guilt exactly, more like recognition. I reached into my pocket and found a coin, a dull dollar coin I keep on me because my grandfather gave it to me. I don't know why I did what I did next. I set the coin on the top rail of the fence and covered it with my palm. "This is not a wedding," I said aloud, feeling ridiculous. "But it's something. I promised I'd help you look. I will. And if I find out something true, I'll come back and say it to you where you can hear it." The fog around my hand cooled to the point of pain, then eased. The coin tapped twice against the iron like something under my hand had moved it. I took my hand away. The coin was gone. I didn't hear it fall. Something like relief passed through the air where she was, and for a second, there was the faintest impression of a hand at my sleeve. A polite, grateful touch from someone who was raised to ask permission even from the world that wronged her. Then it was gone, and the fog unspooled up the hill and thinned like smoke pulled into the trees. I stood there with my empty hand and my empty pocket and the sound of my heart making the only human noise. I went back down and slept like I hadn't slept in weeks. In the morning, the hotel smelled like coffee. Hank looked at me over the desk and squinted. "You look better," he said. "You must have gotten ghost lucky." "That a thing? Where I'm from, it means the dead passed you by without biting. Here it means you heard something that helped." He slid a folded photocopy across the counter. "This came in yesterday. I like to give it to folks who ask the guide too many questions. You can read it or not." It was a scan of a newspaper page from 1888. I read it sitting on the bench outside with the sun warming my jacket. The article was short. "Local woman found," the headline said. "Victim of misadventure." No name was given. A sentence mentioned rain-swollen creeks and new arrivals, and men traveling under assumed names. I folded it after that. The paper had a strange smell that made my tongue feel heavy, like it had been stored in a drawer with mothballs and old perfume. I thought about keeping it. I handed it back to Hank instead. I left that afternoon. I didn't go straight home. I took side roads. I stayed in cheap motels with ice machines that only worked if you kicked them. I called Lauren once from a gas station outside Rapid City. She didn't pick up. I didn't leave a message. What was I going to say? "Hey, I met a woman who kept every promise in her suitcase and a man who kept none of his, and I'm trying to be more like her and less like him." On the third night of the trip back at a roadside motel, I fell asleep early. I woke to the sound of the heater clicking and the faintest rustle by the door. The gap under it breathed cold. A shadow passed across it like a hem. There were 3 soft taps. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a check-in. I said, "I haven't found him." My voice surprised me. It had the same careful tone June used on the tour. "But I'm still looking." The cold eased. The shadow withdrew. And for the rest of the night, the heater held steady. Since then, I catch things. Not often and only in certain airs. The winter fog that creeps across the cattails outside town. The wet smell that climbs out of a ditch after a storm. The mirror above the bar when I get stuck looking at an empty door. I'll see a drift of white that isn't there. I'll hear the 3 taps, never louder than a fingernail. Sometimes a dollar coin will rock in my pocket like it wants out, and I'll hold it and think about promises, and the weight of them, and the way the world tries to rub names off stones. I don't know if I'll ever find out who he was or if he was anyone at all. Maybe his name was a hat other men tried on when they needed credit. Deadwood is full of borrowed faces. What I do know is this. Some vows don't need a church to stick to you. They cling like fog. You can say you never made them. You can say you were misled. The air still remembers. A week ago, I got a letter. An actual paper letter. No return address. the handwriting neat in the way people used to learn in school. Inside was a single torn page from a Bible, the kind you sign. Husband and wife were printed in tiny caps at the top, and both lines were blank. Tucked behind it was a small scrap of lace. It smelled like rain. There was nothing else. I keep that piece of lace in the glove box. When I open it, the truck fills with that cold, clean smell, and for a second I'm back on that hillside, standing next to a fence someone bent with their bare hands in a hurry, listening to a woman ask a question people still don't answer well. On certain mornings when the fog is thin across the yard, I hear it again. The voice that's not dramatic or evil or even angry. Just done being ignored. Have you seen my husband? I tell the fog the only truth I have. No. But I'm here. And the fog settles and the house goes quiet and the day starts. You can call it grief, you can call it guilt. It doesn't matter. Every town has a woman in a torn dress walking up the hill, and every man thinks he's not the one she's looking for. Maybe we all are, maybe that's the point. Maybe a promise is the one ghost you carry that won't stop asking until you answer. If you drive through Deadwood and the fog is low enough to touch your hands, go slow on the boardwalk. If you hear a soft knock, 3 taps, don't be brave and don't be a fool. Open the door if you mean it. Keep it shut if you don't. Either way, listen, she's not a story. She's a woman who believed someone and paid for it. If you say yes, be the kind of person who can follow a torn white hem into the dark and still find your way back down. If you say no, don't say it like a man who thinks words don't stick. I used to think I had to fix everything. Find him. Find proof. Find a line in a book that made it all neat. Now I think it's smaller than that. I think it's standing, still when a tired voice asks a simple question and not looking away. I think it's putting a coin on cold iron and meaning it. I think it's keeping your promises when nobody's watching, not even the dead. And every so often, in the quiet, the tea light in that jar will be lit again in my head, that little stubborn flame inside a glass that can't shelter it from much. No one lights it and it still burns. I don't care if it makes sense, it's there, it's like her. And like the part of me that finally understood what I was supposed to do when the fog came right up to the door and knocked. My name is Caleb Dawson and I'm from Conroe, Texas. If you know Huntsville at all, you know what the air smells like when you drive in off I-45. Pine and hot dust most days. Rust and rain when a storm rolls across the Sam. The prison sits like a stubborn thought at the edge of town. Back when I was still clocking in, maintenance and grounds, nothing heroic, nobody's idea of a CO. My patch was the cemetery. The one folks don't talk about much. The one behind the razor wire and the leaning pines where the numbered dead go down in cheap suits and state-issued socks. I kept it mowed. I kept the sand raked flat after the wind pushed it into ripples. I fixed the pipe that fed the spigot by the gate, wrapped it with foam in winter and unwound it in spring. More times than I can count. I replaced the little aluminum markers when rain chewed the paint off. When the chaplain came by with a Bible and a plastic bag of carnations, I spread the chairs. When the hearse bumped up the washboard road, I stood a little ways off with a shovel and kept my eyes down. You do a job long enough, your brain knows the lines. You can feel it when something is off. Same way you can tell when the coffee pot has stopped perking. That's how I first noticed the grave that moves. It was June. Early. The sun hadn't burned the dew off yet. I had the little Kubota riding mower in one hand and a gas can in the other. And Miguel, he worked with me when his feet weren't acting up, was cussing at a stubborn weed-eater head. A mockingbird was testing out 3 different kinds of bird before breakfast. I set the gas down, looked over the rows and frowned because the run of concrete markers on the east side didn't line up with the ones on the west. Not by much. An inch, maybe 2. You could talk yourself out of seeing it if you wanted to. The cemetery is old. Ground settles. Tree roots do what they do, but this was a neat eastward slide, as if a whole row had been tugged by a string. I chalked it up to a bad day with the transit last summer. At the end of the shift, though, it was still nagging me, so I brought a measuring tape the next morning. Row H, marker 287, 287, stamped deep into gray concrete. The marker to the west was 286. The marker to the east was 288, all of them square to each other. But 287 sat about an inch and a half east of where the grid said it should be. I checked the survey pins. I checked the map in the shed, the one laminated under a smudge of old barbecue sauce. I checked all the way down row H. It was just 287. That slab had crept. "Hey," I told Miguel, pointing with my boot toe. "You ever notice this?" He leaned, squinting like the numbers would jump. "Nah," he said. "Ground moves. Earth does what it wants." Then he grinned at me. "Your eyes getting married to lines again, Jefe?" Maybe they were. I do like lines. I like things straight that are supposed to be straight. I've been that way since my dad and I used to hang Christmas lights along the roof, and he'd put a level on the gutter because it made him feel better, even though nobody in the neighborhood was checking us with a transit. I didn't think about 287 again until September, when the first cool front came tumbling past Lake Livingston, and the sun dropped sooner than I wanted it to. I was tying down a ripped piece of orange wind fencing by the gate. The pines were whispering like they do when the needles dry out and rub against each other. The chain link chattered when a gust came up. I looked over the plots and saw row H again, clean and square except for 287, which sat another inch east. This time it wasn't lines in my head. I'd mowed that space barefoot enough to feel where the tires bit. The slab had crept east, and a whisper worked loose in my ear. Something the old men say at the feed store when they don't want to commit to a story. It ain't right. I'm not trying to make myself sound brave. I'm not. I called the chaplain because he was the only one who'd listen without laughing. Chaplain Rucker is a tired man with a good handshake. He's got a smile that makes you believe he meant to be here. He's also the one who reads scripture while the backhoe idles 30 yards away. So he has a way of seeing the whole plot at once. "All right," he said when I told him. "Show me." We walked out between the rows, our shoes tracking sand. He had his Bible tucked under one elbow and his other hand on his hip, belly and belt buckle shining in the late light. He squatted, thumbed the edge of the marker like it could tell him a secret. "We replace a lot of these," he said. "Maybe it got set wrong." "I said it," I said, "and you said it wrong?" "No," I said, and that hard sound in my voice surprised me. "I don't set them wrong, preacher." He nodded, not embarrassed, not making me feel like I'd made a fuss. "Who is he?" he asked, meaning the grave. "Nameless," I said. "Died in transit. No paper trail that made sense when they called me. We put down a number and a hell of a prayer. That's all we had." "East," he said, gazing toward the tree line. The sky was pale and tender that way it gets right before a cold front finally wins. "Toward the sunrise." "Toward the fence," I said. The chain link lay that way, topped with loose curls of barbed wire. Beyond it, the service road sloped down to a ditch choked with broom sedge. You could be out and gone in 4 steps if a gate stood open and your mind was right. He put his palm on the concrete like you might settle a fevered child. "You want to pour a new footing? Pin it with rebar?" I did. That night, the image of the slab moving kept sneaking between commercials. I ate my dinner standing at the kitchen counter, kept looking out the window without meaning to. East. If you've lived here long enough, sunrise is not just a direction. It's a promise you've grown up under. The next morning, I brought 2 sticks of rebar and a bag of concrete. Miguel watched me like this was good TV. He wasn't mean about it. He just liked seeing a man try to fix the earth. I dug an apron around the slab and poured a fresh collar, set the rebar deep on the west and north edges, and finished it smooth with a wet sponge. I wrote the date in the corner with a nail, 9/18. The concrete cured. The line held. For a little while. I won't pretend the days are all days. Some are funerals. Some are mowing and griping about the gas. Some are driving over to Walker County Hardware for a bolt nobody stocks anymore, and running into a guy you went to high school with who wants to sell you a used bass boat. But every morning your feet go back to the places you worked last, like your body wants to check your math. A week later, 287 had pulled free of the west rebar like a tooth easing out from a tender gum. The new collar cracked on that side, a hairline at first, then a trickle of dust when I brushed it. The slab had moved east again, small but measurable. I could feel it. I could see it. "Creepy," Miguel said softly. He looked east toward the fence and then away. I don't know why this is the part that sticks in my throat when I tell people, even now. It tastes like I'm exaggerating. But when I knelt to feel under the western edge, the soil had a slicker feel, like water had passed through it recently. Not puddled, not muddy, just damp and cool as if the ground itself had drawn breath. When I told Rucker that, he tapped his Bible. "The ground groans," he said. Then, because he's human and doesn't like things he can't fix either, "I'll make a note." 2 months after that, the dawn came late and purple, and the wind brought a smell I hate, rust on wet wire, iron, and old rain. I walked the fence checking for downed limbs because a storm had knocked the lights out halfway across town. At row H, I got that same tickle in the neck feeling as if somebody were about to tug my shirt. 287 had moved again, the crack wider. The east side of the slab had pressed a faint ridge into the sand like a shoulder. Past that, there are things I wish sounded bigger than they were, because big noises at least make you feel like somebody else would have heard them too. I didn't hear tromping or dragging chains. I didn't hear any horror movie music. I did hear a horn from the Union Pacific cutting the fog out by Highway 30, and a dog barking in a yard past Avenue M. What was loud was the silence when that all stopped, as if the pines around us had paused mid-whisper, listening for something I couldn't hear yet. By December, I had a bad habit of standing at 287 with my coffee before I did anything else, like I was checking on a neighbor you can't say hello to. We even started calling it the crawler, but only when we were sure nobody who'd take it wrong was within earshot. Miguel would shake his head and tap his watch like, "You gonna stare it straight again?" The slab had crawled far enough that the mowing lines were crooked. East, always east. Toward the fence, toward the sunrise. We weren't getting that time of year. Nobody told me tales then. Nobody had to. The cemetery carries its own. I've heard radios pick up voices for nobody else. I've seen balloon strings tighten on a dead still day. I've felt the odd change in air pressure right before the hearse turns the corner. And at least once every winter, somebody from somewhere leaves a paper bag by the gate and there's a loaf of bread inside with a bite missing, and a small orange, and a drawing from a kid. Nobody writes a name. The bag is wet from the grass and I break the bread in half and share it with Miguel without discussing it like it is what it is, which is mercy. In January, we got a visit from a woman in a faded denim jacket and boots that had been cleaned with a toothbrush. She kept to herself. She stood by the gate and didn't walk in, which is how you can tell she's local. People who come in from Houston treat the place like a park until you tell them different. Her eyes were flat with it, the same way your eyes get when you've driven all night. "Ma'am?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. "Row H," she said, not moving. "Yes, ma'am," I said and told her which stake to look along. She didn't take a step inside. She just squared her jaw and looked over the top of the fence, found what she was looking for, if it was anything in row H at all, and put her hand flat against the chain link like she could pray through wire. We have rules about photos. We have worse rules about mementos. She had none. She stood with the cold on her cheeks and the pines fussing above and said nothing to me, only to the air. After a while, she walked back to her car, which was not new, and drove off without turning her head. That night, I sat at the table and didn't turn the TV on. I shucked peas into a bowl and thought how grief can turn a person into a compass needle, pointing them toward whatever thing will make them feel like a map exists. I was a compass needle too, I realized, east every morning, east. I thought about crawling. You want to know when it finally moved in a way that wasn't just mine to see? February. We'd had a run of dry days and wind that rattled the tin roof on the shed. A trustee named Earl, old quiet, the kind of man who knows how to make himself an outline against a wall, was helping me scrape lichens off the markers with a putty knife. He keeps his own counsel. A lot of men inside do. He's not one to add on to a story just because it would make it better. He was to my right, down on his haunches, and I was on my knees at 286. The sky had that weak early light the color of dishwater. The ground vibrated under my palm. Not much, not the way a truck can make your coffee jitter. A small tremor, like an animal turning over in sleep. Earl froze, looked at me, looked at the slab. The mark in the sand deepened. The concrete eased, a grit fall of dust and crushed ant nests whispered. We both watched 287 creep. Hear me creep. A half inch to the east. Not jerk, not jump. Ease itself toward sunrise. The way you might shift your shoulder when your arm has fallen asleep. It stopped with a soft, rude little sound like someone smacking their lips. Earl said nothing for a long time. He ran his thumb along his lower lip. Then he stood up and took 2 careful steps back. "No," he said just once and turned and walked quick toward the shed. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicking. He was extremely finished. You know the difference when you see it. We didn't put Earl back on cemetery duty for a while after that. Rucker came that afternoon. I told him. I showed him. He put his palm on the slab again, and I watched to see if it would move under the weight of belief. It didn't. Okay, he said at last and pinched the bridge of his nose. Okay, this isn't, look. Some things need a ritual, Caleb. I don't do that, I said. Although I have, in my ways, stuck to the same side of the hall and touched the same doorframe when I leave a room where somebody died. He smiled a little at me. I'm not talking about Latin, he said. I'm talking about saying a thing out loud where it can hear you. Right words in the right order. I mean, we could call a surveyor and tie it down with chain. But if this is for the living, and mostly what we do out here is for the living, you and me, then the living need to say what it is. What it is, I repeated. A grave that moves, he said, and he said it like he was reading it to the sky, not to me. A grave that moves east. All right, let's say it. If this belongs to someone who cannot stop moving if what they need is mourning, they've had a lot of nights, Caleb. He looked up at me, and there was something in his face I didn't know what to do with. It took me a second to realize it was grief, the kind that has seen you enough times to be comfortable sitting down on your porch. Have you been sleeping? Some, I lied. Miguel didn't come around that week. His feet were acting up again. He texts so much better than he talks. That's the world now. He sent me a picture of Queso, his dog, in a sweater and wrote, "Ooh, good jefe." I wrote back, yeah. I started dreaming the same dream, which I will tell even though it sounds like I'm trying to be interesting. In the dream, I could lie down on the cemetery and spend the whole night feeling the world roll under my spine like a huge animal, the pines bending their heads to listen. I could hear a sound like a low wheeze or like the breath the ground took back in September, but steady and weak. I would wake up with my jaw sore from clenching, sure I'd been grinding, and I'd taste the iron tang you sometimes get if you bite your lip. I checked my pillow for blood. Nothing. March brought sun that felt like a clean shirt after a wet winter. The grass came up in the cracks. I raked and raked. You'd think the place would be quiet, but the cemetery is not quiet when it wakes up in spring. Grass talk, bird talk, the clicking of bugs and the little peeps you swear are a kid until you realize they're frogs. And smaller noises, too. The exact pop of the first ant mound opening for business, the zip of a green lizard that thinks he owns your boot. After a stretch of that kind of day, you start to believe people can be fine. One Saturday, when the chaplain was off marrying someone, I was the only one on the far side of the fence. I had a cooler with a ham sandwich and a Dr. Pepper. I had a socket wrench and the radio on low, a sports station that felt like company. A north breeze scrubbed the sky into a rinsed-out blue. I let an hour pass where I didn't even look at 287. That felt like penance or self-discipline or defiance. It felt for once like not being the compass needle. After lunch, I looked. 7 had shifted overnight more than any day before. The crack on the west side of the collar was wide enough to put 2 fingers into. The east edge had cut a new trench in the sand, shallow as a scrape across your knee, and the line between 287 and the fence was shorter than my shadows. I did what you shouldn't do, and I let myself imagine it in motion while I slept. The rising sun spilling like paint across the concrete and the slab tugging as if it could smell dawn. Part of me wanted to open it. That part had 1,000 reasons ready. Inspect the footing, check the box, make sure the collar hadn't broken sideways and left the vault hanging. Another part of me knew that if I pried that lid, I would not like the shape of my days after. I would not like the taste of my coffee, the sound of my truck, the idea of sunrise. I called Rucker instead. "Don't," he said before I finished. "If it's walking, let it walk." "To what?" "I don't know," he said. "To where morning starts." I went out there at dawn the next 3 days because I could feel the shape of the week. I brought a thermos and my oldest jacket and stood at the fence line in the purple cold and watched. I didn't hear it move. I didn't see it move. But when the light came up enough to show my shadow, 287 was closer. By Wednesday, if I stretched one arm through the fence, I could lay my palm flat on the concrete. The metal twist ties on the top wire sang when the wind hit them, a sad little harmonica. The pines whispered prayers nobody had taught me. On Thursday, I took my crowbar. Here is the part where you get to judge me. There was a man once who should not have died. It wasn't my hand. It wasn't my voice. But I signed the maintenance log the night before the execution and wrote, "No issues noted with line pressure, circuit readouts normal." I wrote that because I had grown used to filling in blanks. I wrote that because if I raised a flag, Someone would ask me to stay late and explain something I only half understood. And my son had a ball game, and I didn't want to be the man whose job expanded because he cared too much. In truth, the gauge on the east wall had shown a twitch. Not failing. Just a twitch. Things twitched all the time in that place. Lights, radios, gauges. The building was a restless, tired animal. I logged it clean. The next night, a man took a long time to die, longer than comfort and longer than mercy. And I was there because they sometimes asked a grounds guy to be there when they didn't want all COs in the room. I stood quiet behind the one-way glass with my hands at my sides and felt my jaw clench and tasted iron and wrote, later, nothing at all. The grave that moves doesn't belong to him. That's the part that gets me. That man had his name. He had a headstone with letters that will outlast mine. 287 is somebody else. He died unnamed or unclaimed or unwise in a place where night had been long enough already. He's crawling toward morning, and each night I sleep as if my body is letting him take my time to do it. I slid the crowbar under the west edge of the slab. It's not the lid of a vault. It's just the marker. The box under the sand would still be closed if sanity and rules meant anything. The slab stuck on the rebar, then loosened. I grunted pride. An ant wandered over the toe of my boot without saluting. The concrete lifted enough to put my fingers under. I wriggled it sideways and let it settle in the grass. The rectangle of sand underneath was pale and smooth, the shape of a door. I scraped with the flat of my hand. Just below the surface, I found the lid of the box, a cheap vault. Plastic, the kind that keeps the earth off for a while. It had shifted toward the east as well. Fine sand had drifted into a wedge along its west side, pale and pretty like sifted flour. I listened. I don't know what for. I told myself I was listening for a broken pipe, a leak, a mole. They have moles out there sometimes. Instead, what I heard was my own breathing and the light press of dawn on the chain link. Not today, I said out loud. Then, because I had been borrowing his language, I added, "You want morning? You've got it. You'll get there." I put the slab back down, lining it up with the new truth instead of the old measurements. I dusted my hands and stood up and felt an old man's ache in my knees. The sun cleared the pines and washed the markers pale. The shadows all pointed west like compass needles in reverse. Something moved in my peripheral vision, not at ground level but above it. I turned my head slowly. The denim-jacketed woman from January stood by the gate again, fingers curled through the chain link like you might hold onto a rope if you had to. I don't know how long she'd been there. I don't know if she had slept in her car or driven all night again. She was watching row H, just row H, not me, not the crowbar, not the foolishness of a groundsman having a conversation with a box. You know him? I asked, because the air between us had a feeling like church, like I shouldn't talk and the only way to make room for talking was to step into it carefully. She shook her head once, a small movement. "No," she said. "But my brother," she stopped. People stop like that when they are standing on a sentence that means a great deal. "My brother could not stop moving," she finished, which is not what I expected her to say. Not even when he was clean. He'd talk about the sunrise like it was a person. Like it was late if it wasn't pink enough. "You want to come in?" I asked, knowing she wouldn't. "No," she said. "I can see him from here." "Him?" She shrugged, and for a second the denim jacket lifted and settled like a bird making itself comfortable. "Whatever's moving," she said. "I can see him from here." We stood like that until the sun climbed enough to be ordinary. She didn't cry. I didn't either. She tucked her hands into her jacket pockets and went back to her car. And when the engine turned over, I felt like a host of people I have known were turning over with it. Men who had run out of words and women who had run out of patience and kids who had not yet learned where to put either. I started sleeping again around the same time the mockingbirds went insane with spring. The dreams eased. Work went on. Mowing, raking, fixing. A funeral came through for a man nobody had claimed, and it had the mean quickness of something done because it had to be. Rucker said the right words in a voice that did not shake, and the trustee set the straps, and I turned my face into the wind, so I wouldn't be the one to break the line. You want your story to end there? I know. That's tidy. But the grave kept moving. That's the truth about graves and mournings and guilt. They keep going until they reach whatever fence they're aimed toward. At the end of April, I came out with a fresh bag of sackcrete because I had a dumb idea about building a lip that would stop the creep. As if you can make a better dike with a shovel and a $30 bag than a river can with its whole mind. I laid the bag down and took a sip of coffee and drew a breath that tasted like the first cutting of hay. Then I saw that 287 had reached the fence. The east edge of the slab pressed up against the bottom of the chain link like it wanted to slide under. The grass there was bent like hair combed wrong. The dirt was cool to the touch. When I put my palm on the concrete, it didn't vibrate. Not the way it had in February. It just sat there full of intent like a dog at a screen door. On the other side of the fence, the ditch looked shallow, then a lip of gravel, then the 2-lane service road and a slice of field that caught the morning light and held onto it like a lover. I squatted, not because I needed a better angle, but because I wanted to be small. I put my fingers against the fence and peered down. The slab had rubbed paint off the bottom wire where years ago someone had rolled a coat of cheap silver across it. The metal was dull and pitted. A sound came from below where metal meets concrete, and it was not a voice. It was not a demon. It was the sound metal makes when it is about to give in. Tiny, singing, defeated. I looked back down the rows. Nobody was there. I looked up. The pines were there, acting innocent. The sun stood like a watchman just off shift. My hand slid toward my pocket for my phone, the reflex we all have now, and I stopped it. Because this felt like a moment that should not be made into a rectangle and filed away to be forgotten under food pictures. Okay, I said out loud, which is a word that can mean surrender and acceptance and no. Okay, I unhooked the bottom of the fence. There's a way to do it with your thumb and the heel of your hand if you've done it 1,000 times. I popped the twist and rolled it, bent the bottom of the chain link up and then under like a hem. The slab had an angle cut into its east edge where it had been wearing itself thin against the wire, the concrete gritty as an old man's beard. I held the fence up with one hand and with the other pushed 287 a little. It slid. Not far. Not like in some story where the moment you release whatever binds a thing, it bolts free and vanishes screaming. It crept the way it always had. A small, deliberate movement like a body settling into a bed. It made that soft, rude noise. It moved past the line where the fence had rested, and I let the chain link down gently so it kissed the dirt again. On the other side, the slab left a channel that looked exactly like what it was. A grave marker moving under a fence like a man crawling under a door. It didn't keep going fast. It didn't shoot off into the ditch. It sat half in, half out, the way a person does when they are not sure what they'll find in the next room. I stood there with my hand on the wire and my breath coming shorter than it should have been for such a small effort. My hands shook. If anyone had come up from behind me, I would have been ashamed and weirdly angry. The sun felt hotter than it had a right to. Morning, I said because I couldn't help myself. I left it there. I put the twist back in the fence loose enough to lift again. I marked nothing on any map. I wrote nothing on any log. I didn't tell Miguel because he picks at things with jokes until they come apart, and I didn't have the strength for that. I didn't tell Rucker because he would have put a hand on my shoulder and said words that would have made it harder not to cry. The next day, half. The day after, 3/4. By Sunday, the slab sat in the ditch like a puck a child had rolled too hard. The trench behind it curved like a drawn-out S where it had adjusted itself around roots or stones. I do not know if it kept moving at night. I do not know if dawn tugged or if noon did, or if it was something else entirely, an urge without a clock. Nobody demanded to know what the hell I was doing. The world has a way of not looking where it will hurt. Perhaps more folks saw than I realized and chose to keep their eyes on their shoes. Maybe there are more compass needles than I've counted all pointing east together, and we keep that secret out of kindness. The last time I went out there as a man paid by the state of Texas to mow grass around the unknown dead, the slab had crossed the ditch and settled just shy of the gravel, where the morning pooled shallow before spilling across the field. A piece of it had chipped off, a little triangle like a tooth a kid puts under a pillow. I picked it up and rubbed it with my thumb until it shone with oil and dust. I put it in my pocket and then took it back out and set it on top of the slab, because I do not need trophies, and because sometimes you fix a thing by not keeping a part of it. I breathed in rust, soil, that sweet wet smell the ground gets right before the heat starts biting. The pines had stopped whispering. The wire was quiet. The world, for once, felt like it wasn't trying so hard to say something to me, and would be okay if I didn't have an answer. I did not quit because of 287. That would make me sound noble in a way I am not. I quit because my back hurt too much in the mornings and the mower seat felt like a punishment my knees couldn't bargain with anymore. I quit because my son asked me to come to a game that wasn't even his, just some kid he liked, and the words got stuck in my throat the way they do when grief and joy both show up wearing the same jacket. I quit because you should not spend your whole life being the man who sees things move and says nothing. When I drive past now, and I do, because you can't get to Huntsville from Conroe without seeing a fence or a pine or a sign that reminds you of it, I keep my eyes on the road like a good citizen. I do not look toward the ditch. I do not look toward the field. I do not check the line of the fence for strange shimmies of chain link. I am trying to be the kind of person who lets the morning be what it is. But sometimes at red lights my jaw tightens and I taste that iron again. When I pull into my driveway, the sun throwing light across the cracked concrete like a man setting down plates in a new house, I look down and see tracks I didn't know I'd made in the dust. They never point the way I think they will. On the far side of town, a concrete slab with a number stamped deep and unashamed has been turning its face toward the sunrise, long enough that it no longer needs me to lift the fence. Maybe it made the road by now. Maybe the gravel took it into its bright, hard self and rolled it like a stream, slow and sure. Maybe it stopped in the exact strip of light it had been aiming for and went quiet. A door opening somewhere I can't see from here. Maybe it will keep crawling east, always east, until it hits a fence we don't get to lift, I don't know. I'm telling you what I saw and what I did and what I didn't do. If you walk out there at dawn, you might not see anything strange. The pines will whisper the same nonsense they whisper to everyone. The wire will hum its tired song. The markers will sit straight except for the ones that do not. And if you stop by row H and find an empty rectangle where there should be a slab, if your boots sink just a hair in cool sand that feels like an exhale, if you hear something that is not a voice and not a bird and not your blood, understand me. Not every punishment ends when the dirt comes down. Some of it keeps crawling, patient as the sun. Some of it is a compass we don't want but can't put down. If you work out there, try not to sign anything just to make a day shorter. Try not to put a line where there should be a question. That's the only advice I've got. When it's quiet again, you'll hear the train. You'll hear a dog. You'll think about the woman at the fence. The way she could see someone who wasn't hers and make him enough. You'll think about Earl walking away because he knew finished when he saw it. And when the air starts to smell like rust and soil again, when the first light slides under the wire and lays itself across the ground like a sheet on a sleeping body, you'll understand why a nameless grave might want to crawl toward it. You may understand why a man holds a fence up with one hand and keeps the other hand empty. And you may walk back to your truck with your jaw clenched, tasting iron, promising, quiet as you can, to stop moving when it's time.